Part 2, Chapter 9 of The Magnificent Adventure. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Mike Manolakes. The Magnificent Adventure by Emerson Hough. Part 2, Chapter 9. The Summons. The winter was wearing away. The wildfowl were passing northward, landward. The game had changed its haunts. March was coming, the month between the seasons for the tribes, the time of want, the leanest period of the year. Meriwether Lewis, alone one morning in the comfortable cabin which served as a house for himself and his friend, sat pondering on these things as was his wont. His little Indian dog, always his steady companion, had taken its place on the top of the flatted stump which served as a desk, near the maps and papers which Lewis had pushed away. Here the small creature sat, motionless, mute, its eyes fixed adoringly upon its master. The captain did not notice it. He did not at first hear the rap on the door, nor the footfall of the man who entered inquiringly. "Yes, Sergeant Ordway," said he presently, looking up. Ordway saluted. "Something for you, sir. It seems to be a letter." "A letter? How could that be?" "Well, that is the puzzle, sir," said Ordway, extending a folded and sealed bit of paper. "We do not know how it came. Charbonneau's wife, the Indian woman, found it in the baby's hammock just now. She brought it to me, and I saw it was addressed to you. It must have been overlooked by you some time." Possibly, said Lewis. His face was growing pale. "That is all, I think, Sergeant," he added. Now alone, he turned toward the letter which lay upon the table. His face lighted with a wondrous smile, though none might see it save the little dog which watched his every movement. For Meriwether Lewis had received once more the thing for which every fiber of his being clamored. He knew, without one look, that the number scratched in the wax of the seal would be the figure 4. He opened the letter slowly. There fell from it a square of stiff white paper, all white, he thought, until he turned it over. Then he saw it looking up at him. Her face, indeed. It was a little silhouette in black, done in that day before the camera, when small portraits were otherwise well nigh impossible. The artist, skilled as were many in this curious form of portraiture, had done his work well. Lewis gazed with a sudden leap of his pulses upon the features outlined before him, the profile so cleanly cut and lofty, the hair low over the forehead, the chin round and firm, yet delicate and womanly withal. Here even the long lashes of her eyes were visible, just as in life. Yes, it was her face. And now he read the letter, which covered many closely written sheets. "Meriwether Lewis, I said to you that my face should come to you, wherever you might be. This time it has been long. I cannot tell how long. That is for my messenger to determine, not for you or me. But that it has been long I shall know, else long since there would have been no need of my adding this letter to the others. Not one of them has served to bring you back. Since you now have this one, let it advise you that she who wrote it is grieved that you gaze upon this little portrait and not upon the face of her whom it represents. 'Tis a monstrous good likeness, they tell me, but would you not rather it were myself? Where are you? I cannot tell. What adversities have been yours? I cannot tell that. You cannot know what grief you have caused by your long absence. You cannot know how many hearts you have made sad. You cannot know how you have delayed, destroyed plans made for you. We are in ignorance, each of the other now. I do not know where you are. You do not know where I may be. A great wall arises between us. A great gulf is fixed. We cannot touch hands across it. As I know this will not move you, but I cannot restrain this reproach. I cannot help telling you that you have made me suffer by your silence, by your absence. Do I make you suffer by looking at you with reproach in my eyes, as I do now? You have forgotten your childhood friend. I may be dead as you read. Would you care? I have been in need, yet you have not come to comfort me, and to dry my tears. Figure to yourself what has happened to all my plans and dreams for you. Even I cannot tell of that, because as I write, it all lies in the future, that future which is the present for you as you sit reading this. All I know is that as you read it, my appeal has failed. I can but guess how or where these presents may find you, for how shall I know how wise or how faithful my messenger has been? Are you on the prairie still, Meriwether Lewis? Is it winter? Does the snow lie deep? Are the winds keen and biting? Are you well fed? Are you warm? Have you bodily comforts? Have you physical well-being? How can I answer all these questions? Yet they come to my mind as I write. Are you in the mountains? Were there, after all, those great stony mountains of which men told fables? Have you found the great unicorn, or the mammoth, or the mastodon, which Mr. Jefferson said you were likely to meet? Have you found the dinosaur, or the dragon, or the great serpents of a foregone day? Suppose you have. What do they weigh with me, with you? Are they so much to you as you thought they would be? Is the taste of all your triumphs so sweet as you have dreamed, Meriwether Lewis? Have you grown savage, my friend? Have you come to be just a man like the others? Tell me. No, I will not ask you. If I thought you could descend to the lawless standard of the wilderness. But no, I cannot think of that. In any case, 'tis too late now. You have not come back to me. You see, I am writing not so much to implore you to return as to reproach you for not returning. By the time this reaches you, it will be too late in our plans. We could not afford to wait months, 3 months, 4, 6. Has it been so long as that since you left us? If so, it is too late now. If we have failed, why did we fail? They told me, my father and his friends, and I told you plainly, that if your expedition went on, then our plan must fail. But now I must presume that you have succeeded, or by this time you are beyond the feeling of either success or failure. If you have failed, it is too late for us to succeed. If you have succeeded, then certainly we have failed. As you read this, you may be doing so with hope. I, who wrote it, will be sitting in despair. Meriwether Lewis, come back to me even so. It will be too late for you to aid me. You will have ruined all our hopes. But yours will still be the task, the duty, to look me in the face and say whether you owe aught to me. Can I forgive you? Why, yes, I could never do aught else than forgive. No matter what you did, I fear I should forgive you, because, after all, my own wish in all this... let me write slowly here and think very carefully. My greatest wish in this, greater than any ambition I had for myself or my family, has been for you. See, I am writing those words. Would I dare tell them to any other man in all the world? Nay, surely not. But that I trust you, the very writing itself is proof. And I write this to you, who never can be to me what man must be to woman if either is to be happy. The man to whom I can never be what woman must be if she is to mean all to any man. Apart forever? We are estranged by circumstance, sundered by that, if you please, weak as those words seem. And yet something takes your soul to mine. Does something take mine to you across all the wilderness, across all the miles, across all the long and bitter months? I say to you once more that in all this my demand upon you has not been for myself, nor wholly for my father. Let me be careful here. This impassable gulf is fixed between us for all our lives. Neither of us may cross it. But I have been desirous to see you stand among men, where you belong. Do not ask me why I wish that. You must never ask me. I am Mrs. Alston, even as I write. And as for you, are you in rags as you read this? Are you cold and hungry? Are you alone, aloof, deserted, perhaps suffering, with none to comfort you? I cannot aid you. Nay, I shall punish you once more and say that it was your desire, that you brought this on yourself, that you would have it thus in spite of all my intervention for you. Moreover, you shall say to yourself always, she asked, and I refused her. Nay, nay, I shall not be so cruel. I shall not say that at all. Let me mark that out, because if I write that, you will think I wish to hurt you. And, my friend, let me admit the truth I ought not to lay upon you as any secret. I could never wish to hurt you. They say that men far away in the wilderness sometimes long for the sight of the face of a woman. See, now you have that. I look up at you. What is your impulse? I am alone with you. I am in your hands. Treat me, therefore, with honor, I pray you. You must not raise my face to yours, must not bend yours to mine. See now, measure my trust in you, Meriwether Lewis. Estimate the great confidence I hold in you as a gentleman, because, do you not see? A gentleman does not kiss the woman whom he has at a disadvantage, the woman who can never be his, who is another's. Is it not true? Happiness is not for us. We are so far apart. I am sad. Good night, Meriwether Lewis. I too have your picture by me, the one you gave me years ago when I was in Virginia. And it... Good night, Mr. Meriwether Lewis. Place me apart, far from you in the room. Let my face not look at you direct, but in your heart, your hard heart of a man intent on dreams, forgetful of all else. Please, please let there linger some small memory of her who dares to write these lines, and who hopes that you may never see them. End of Part 2, Chapter 9.
Chapter 2, Part 10 of The Magnificent Adventure. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Magnificent Adventure by Emerson Hough. Chapter 10. The Abyss. The little Indian dog sat on the table, silent, motionless, looking at its master, whose head was bowed upon his arms. Now and then it had stooped, as if it would have looked in his face, but dared not, if for very excess of love. It turned an inquiring eye to the door, which after a time opened. William Clark, silent, stood once more at the side of his friend. He looked on the sad and haggard face which was turned toward him, and fell back. His eye caught the sight of the folded paper crushed between Lewis's fingers. He asked no questions, but he knew. "Enough!" broke out Meriwether Lewis hoarsely. "No more of this. We must be gone. Are the men ready? Why do we delay? Why are we not away for the journey home?" So impatient, so incoherent, did his speech seem that for a time Clark almost feared lest his friend's reason might have been affected. But he only stood looking at Lewis, ready to be of such aid as might be. "In 2 hours, Mern," said he, "we will be on our way." It was now near the end of March. They dated and posted up their bulletins. They had done their task. They had found the great river. They had found the sea. They had mapped the way across the new continent. Their glorious work had gloriously been done. Such was their joy at starting home again. The boatmen disregarded the downcoming current of the great waters. They sang at the paddles, jested. Only their leader was silent and unsmiling, and he drove them hard. Short commons they knew often enough before they reached the mouth of the Walla Walla, where they found friendly Indians who gave them horse meat, which seemed exceedingly good food. The Nez Perce, whose country was reached next beyond the Walla Wallas, offered guides across the Bitter Roots. But now the snow lay deep, the horses could not travel. For weeks they lay in camp on the Kooskoosky, eating horse meat as the Indians then were doing, waiting, fretting. It was the middle of June before they made the effort to pass the Bitter Roots. 60 horses they had now, with abundance of jerked horse meat, and a half a dozen Nez Perce guides. By the 3rd of July, just 3 years from the date of the Louisiana Purchase as it was made known at Mr. Jefferson's Simplicity Dinner, they were across the Bitter Roots once more, in the pleasant valleys of the eastern slope. "That way," said Sacagawea, pointing. "Big Falls." She meant the short cut across the string of the bow, which would lead over the Continental Divide direct to the great falls of the Missouri. Both leaders had pondered over this short cut, which the Nez Perce knew well. "We must part, Will," said Meriwether Lewis. It is our duty to learn all we can of this wonderful country. I will take the Indian trail straight across. You go down the way we came. Pick up our caches above the three forks of the Missouri, and then cross over the mountains to the Yellowstone. Make boats there, and come on down to the mouth of that river. You should precede me there, perhaps, by some days. Wait then until I come." With little more ado, these self-reliant men parted in the middle of the vast mountain wilderness. They planned a later junction of their two parties at the mouth of a river which was less known than the Columbia had been, through a pass which none of them had ever seen. Lewis had with him 9 men, among them Sergeant Gass, the 2 Fields boys, Drouillard and Cruzat, the voyagers. Sacagawea, in spite of her protest, remained with the Clark party, where her wonderful knowledge of the country again proved invaluable. This band advanced directly to the southward by easy and pleasant daily stages. "That way short path over mountains," said Sacagawea at length at one point of their journey. She pointed out the Big Hole Trail, and what was later known as Clark's Pass over the Continental Divide. They came to a new country, a beautiful valley where the grass was good, but Sacagawea still pointed onward. "That way," said she. "Fine boat, fine cache." She showed them another gap in the hills, as yet unknown, and so led them out by a short cut directly to the caches on the Jefferson. But they could not tarry long. Boots and saddles again, pull and paddle also, for now some of the men must take to the boats, while others brought on the horses. At the Three Forks rendezvous they made yet other changes, for here the boats must be left. Captain Clark must cross the mountain range to the eastward to find the Yellowstone, of which the Indian girl had told him. "Yonder," she said, "not quite a full day's march through a notch in the lofty mountains, they would come to the river, which ran off to the east." None of them had ever heard of that gap in the hills. There was no one to guide them through it except the Indian girl, whose memory had hitherto been so positive and so trustworthy. They trusted her implicitly. "That way," she said. Always she pointed on ahead confidently, and always she was right. She was laying out the course of a railroad which one day should come up the Yellowstone and cross here to the Missouri. They found it to be no more than 18 or 20 miles, Sacagawea's extraordinary short cut between the Missouri and the Yellowstone. They struck the latter river below the mouth of its great canyon, found good timber, and soon were busy felling great cottonwoods to make dugout canoes. 2 of these, some 30 feet in length, were lashed side by side, served to carry all their goods and some of their party. The rest, Pryor, Shannon, Hall, and 1 or 2 others, were to come on down with the horses. The mounted men did well enough until one night the Crows stole all their horses, and left them on foot in the middle of the wilderness. Not daunted, they built themselves boats of bullhide, as they had seen the Indians do, and soon they followed on down the river. They could not tell how far, to the rear of the main boat party. With the marvelous good fortune which attended the entire expedition, they had no accident, and in time they met the other explorers at the mouth of the Yellowstone, after traveling 900 miles on a separate voyage of original discovery. It was on the 8th of August that the last of Clark's boats arrived at the Yellowstone rendezvous. His men felt now as if they were almost home. The Mandan villages were not far below. As soon as Captain Lewis should come, they would be on their way, rejoicing. Patient, hardy, uncomplaining, they did not know that they were heroes. What of Lewis, then gone so long? He and his men were engaged in the yet more dangerous undertaking of exploring the country of the dreaded Blackfeet, known to bear arms obtained from the northern traders. They reached the portage of the Great Falls without difficulty, and eagerly examined the caches which they had left there. Now they were to divide their party. "Sergeant Gass," said Captain Lewis, "I'm going to leave you here. You will get the baggage and the boats below the falls, and take passage on down the river. 6 of you can attend to that. I shall take Drouillard and the Fields boys with me, and strike off toward the north and east, where I fancy I shall find the upper portion of Maria's River. When you come to the mouth of that river, which you will remember some of you held to be the real Missouri, you will go into camp and wait for us. You will remain there until the first day of September. If by that time we have not returned, you will pass on down the Missouri to Captain Clark's camp, at the mouth of the Yellowstone, and go home with him. By that time it will have become evident that we shall not return. I plan to meet you at the mouth of Maria's River somewhere about the beginning of August." They parted, and it was almost by a miracle that they ever met again, for now the perils of the wilderness asserted themselves even against the marvelous good fortune which had thus far attended them. Hitherto, practically all the tribes met had been friendly, but now they were in the country of the dreaded Blackfeet, who by instinct and training were hostile to all whites coming in from the south and east. A party of these warriors was met on the second day of their northbound journey from the Missouri River. Lewis gave the Indians such presents as he could, and, as was his custom, told them of his purpose in traveling through the country. He showed no fear of them, although he saw his own men outnumbered 10-1. The two parties, the little band of white men and the more numerous band of Blackfeet, lay down to sleep that night in company. But the Blackfeet were unable to resist the temptation to attain sudden wealth by seizing the horses and guns of these strangers. Toward dawn Lewis himself, confident in the integrity of his guests, and dozing for a time, felt the corner of his robe pulled, felt something spring on his face, heard a noise. His little dog was barking loudly, excitedly. He was more fully awakened by the sound of a shout, and then by a shot. Springing from his robes, he saw Drouillard and both of the Fields boys on their feet, struggling with the savages, who were trying to wrench their rifles from them. "Curse you! Turn loose of me!" cried Reuben Fields. He fought for a time longer with his brawny antagonist, till he saw the others coming. Then his hand went to the long knife at his belt, and the next instant the Blackfoot lay dead at his feet. Drouillard wrenched his rifle free and stood off his man for a moment, shouting all the time to his leader that the Indians were trying to get the horses. Lewis saw the thieves tugging at the picket ropes and hastened into the fray, cursing himself for his own credulity. A giant Blackfoot engaged him, bull-hide shield advanced, battle-axe whirling, but wresting himself free, Lewis fired point-blank into his body, and another Indian fell dead. The Blackfeet found they had met their match. They dropped the picket ropes and ran as fast as they could, jumped into the river, swam across, and so escaped, leaving the little party of whites unhurt, but much disturbed. "Mount, men! Hurry!" Lewis ordered. As quickly as they could master the frightened horses, the men obeyed. With all thought of further exploration ended, they set out at top speed and rode all that day and night as fast as the horses could travel. They had made probably 120 miles when at length they came to the mouth of the Maria's River, escaped from the most perilous adventure any of them had had. Here again, by that strange good fortune which seemed to guide them, they arrived just in time to see the canoes of Gas and his men coming down the Missouri. These latter had made the grand portage at the falls, had taken up all the caches, and had brought the contents with them. The Stars still fought for the volunteers for the discovery of the West. There was no time to wait. The Blackfeet would be coming soon. Lewis abandoned his horses here. The entire party took to the boats and hurried down the river as fast as they could, paddling in relays day and night. Gaunt, eager, restless, moody, silent, their leader neither urged his men nor chided them, nor did he refer to the encounter with the Blackfeet. He did not need to, with Drouillard to describe it to them all a dozen times. At times it was necessary for the boats to stop for meat, usually a short errand in a country alive with game. But, as was his custom, Lewis stepped ashore one evening to try for a shot at some near-by game, elk, buffalo, antelope, whatever offered. He had with him Cruzat, the one-eyed Frenchman. It was now that fortune frowned ominously almost for the first time. The two had not been gone more than a few minutes, when the men remaining at the boat heard a shot, then a cry, and more shouting. Cruzat came running back to them through the bushes, calling out at the top of his voice, "The captain! I've killed him! I've killed the captain! I've shot him!" "What is that you're saying?" demanded Patrick Gass. "If you've done that, you would be better dead yourself." He reached out, caught Cruzat's rifle, and flung it away from him. "Where is he?" he demanded. Cruzat led the way back. "I see something move on the bushes," said he, "and I shoot. It was not elk, it was the captain. Mon Dieu, what shall we do?" They found Captain Lewis sitting up, propped against a clump of willows, his leggings stripped to the thigh. He was critically examining the path of the bullet, which had passed through the limb. At seeing him alive, his men gave a shout of joy, and Cruzat received a parting kick from his sergeant. There were actual tears in the eyes of some of the men as they gathered around their commander, tears which touched Meriwether Lewis deeply. "It is all right, men," said he. "Do not be alarmed. Do not reprove the man too much. The sight of a little blood should not trouble you. We are all soldiers. This is only an accident of the trail, and in a short time it will be mended. See, the bone is not broken." They aided him back to the boats and made a bed upon which he might lie, his head propped up so that he could see what lay ahead. Other men completed the evening hunt, and the boats hurried on down the river. The next day found them 50 miles below the scene of the accident. "Sergeant," said Meriwether Lewis, "the natural fever of my wound is coming on. Give me my little war sack yonder. I must see if I can find some medicine." Gass handed him his bag of leather, and Lewis sought in it for a moment. His hand encountered something that crinkled in the touch, crinkled familiarly. For one instant he stopped, his lips compressed as if in bodily pain. It was another of the mysterious letters. Before he opened it, he looked at it, frowning, wondering. Whence came these messages, and how? By whose hand? All of them must have been written before he left St. Louis in May of 1804. Now it was August of 1806. There was no human agency outside his own party that could have carried them. How had they reached him? What messenger had brought them? He forgot the fever of his wound in another and greater fever which arose in his blood. He was with his men now. Their eyes were on him all the time. What should he do? Cast this letter from him into the river? If he did so, he felt that it would follow him mysteriously, pointing to the corpus delicti of his crime, still insistent on coming to the eye. His men, therefore, saw their leader casually open a bit of paper. They had seen him do such things 1,000 times, since journals and maps were a part of the daily business of so many of them. What he did attracted no attention. Captain Lewis would have felt relieved had it attracted more. Before he read any of the words that lay before him, in this same delicate handwriting that he knew so well, he cast a slow and searching gaze upon the face of every man that was turned toward him. In fact, he held the letter up to view rather ostentatiously, hoping that it would evoke some sign. But he saw none. He had not been in touch with the main party for more than a month. He had with him 9 men. Which of these had secretly carried the letter? Was it Gass, Cruzat, Drouillard, Reuben Fields, or McNeil? He studied their faces alternately. Not an eyelash flickered. The men who looked at him were anxious only for his comfort. There was no trace of guilty knowledge in any of these honest countenances before him, and he who sought such admitted his own failure. Meriwether Lewis lay back on his couch in the boat, as far as ever from his solution of the mystery. After all, mere curiosity as to the nature of that mystery was a small matter. It seemed of more worth to feel, as he did, that the woman who had planned this system of surprises for him was one of no ordinary mind. And it was no ordinary woman who had written the words that he now read. Sir and my friend, almost I am in despair. This is my 5th letter. You received it, perhaps, some months after your start. I think you would have come back before now, if that had been possible. I had no news of you, and now I dread news. Should you still be gone a year from the time I write this, then I shall know that you were dead. Dead? Yes, I have written that word. The swift thought comes to me that you will never see this at all, that it must, arrive too late. Yet I must send it, even under that chance. I must write it, though it ruin all my happiness. Shall it come to you too late, others will take it to my husband. Then this secret, the one secret of my life, will be known. Ah, I hope this may come to your eyes, your living eyes. But should it not, none the less I must write it. What matter? If it should be read by any other after your death, that would be too late to make difference with you, or any difference for me. After that I should not care for anything, not even that then others would know what I would none might ever know save you and my Creator, so long as we both still lived. This wilderness which you love, the wilderness to which you fled for your comfort, what has it done for you? Have you found that lonely grave which is sometimes the reward of an adventurer thither? If so, do you sleep well? I shall envy you, if that is true. I swear I often would let that thought come to me, of the vast comfort of the plains, of the mountains, the sweep of the untiring winds, sweet in the trees and grasses, or the perpetual sound of water passing by, washing out, to the voice of its unending murmurs, all memory of our trials, of our sins. What need now to ask you to come back? What need to reproach you any further? How could I? How can I? With this terrible thought in my soul that I am writing to a man whose eyes cannot see, whose ears cannot hear. Still, what difference, whether or not you be living? Have not your eyes thus far been blind to me? Have not your ears been deaf to me, even when I spoke to you direct? It was the call of your country against my call. Was ever thinking woman who could doubt what a strong man would do? I suppose I ought to have known. But oh, the longing of a woman to feel that she is something greater in a man's life even than his deeds and his ambitions, even than his labors, even than his patriotism. It is hard for us to feel that we are but puppets in the great game of life, of so small worth to any man. How can we women read their hearts? What do we know of men? I cannot say, though I am a married woman. My husband married me. We had our honeymoon, and he went away about the business of his plantations. Does every girl dream of a continuous courtship and find a dull answer in the facts? I do not know. How freely I write to you, seeing that you are blind and deaf, of that wish of a woman to be the one grand passion of a strong man's life, above all, before even his country. What may once have been my own dream of my capacity to evoke such emotions in the soul of any man, I have flung into the scrap heap of my life. The man, the one man, no. What was I saying, Meriwether Lewis, to you but now, even though you are blind and deaf? I must not. Nay, let me dream no more. It is too late now. Living or dead, you are deaf and blind to all that I could ever do for you. But if you be still living, if this shall meet your living eyes, however cold and clear they may be, please, please remember it was not for myself alone that I took on the large ambitions of which I have spoken to you, the large risks engaged with them. Nay, do not reproach me. Leave me my woman's right to make all the reproaches. I only wanted to do something for you. I have not written so freely to any man in all my life. I could not do so now did I not feel in some strange way that by this time perhaps, at this very time, you are either dead or in some extreme peril. If I knew that you would see this, I could not write it. As it is, it gives me some relief. It is my confessional. How often does a woman ever confess her own, her inner and real heart? Never, I think, to any man, certainly not to any living present man. I married, yes. It seemed the ordinary and natural thing to do, a useful, necessary, desirable thing to do. I should not complain. I did that with my eyes well opened, and with full counsel of my father. My eyes well opened, but my heart well closed. I took on my duties as one of the species human, my duties as wife, as head of a household, as lady of a certain rank. I did all that, for it is what most women would do. It is the system of society. My husband is content. What am I writing now? Arguing, justifying, defending? Ah, were it possible that you would read this and come back to me, never, never, though it killed me, would I open my heart to you. I write only to a dead man, I say, to one who can never hear. I write once more to a man who set other things above all that I could have done. Deeds, what you call your country, your own impulses, these were the things you placed above me. You placed above me this adventure into the wilderness. Yes, I know what are the real impulses in your man's life. I know what you valued above me. But you are dead. While you lived, I hoped your conscience was clean. I hope that never once have you descended into any conduct not belonging to Meriwether Lewis of Virginia. I know that no matter what temptation was yours, you would remember that I was Mrs. Alston, and that you were Meriwether Lewis of Virginia. Nay, I cannot stop. How can you mind my garrulous pen, my vain pen, my wicked, shameful pen, since you cannot see what it says? Ah, I had so hoped once more to see you before it was too late. Should this not reach you, and should it reach others, why, let it go to all the world that Theodosia Burr that was, Mrs. Alston of Carolina that is, once ardently importuned a man to join her in certain plans for the betterment of his fortunes as well as her own, and that you did not care to share in those plans. So I failed. And further, let that also go out to the world. I glory in the truth that I have failed. Yes, that at last is the truth at the bottom of my heart. I have searched it to the bottom, and I have found the truth. I glory in the truth that you have not come back to me. There. Have I not said all that a woman could say to a man, living or dead? Just as strongly as I have urged you to return, just as strongly as I have hoped that you would not return, in my soul I wanted to see you go on in your own fashion, following your own dreams and caring naught for mine. That was the Meriwether Lewis I had pictured to myself. I shall glory in my own undoing, if it has meant your success. Holding to your own ambition, keeping your own loyalty, holding your own counsel and your own speech to the end, pushing on through everything to what you have set out to do, that is the man I could have loved. Deeds, high accomplishments, these in truth are the things which are to prevail. The selfish love of success as success, the love of ease, of money, of power. These are the things women covet from a man. Yes, but they are not the things a woman loves in a man. No, it is the stiff-necked man, bound in his own ambition, whom women love, even as they swear they do not. Therefore, do not come back to me, Meriwether Lewis. Do not come. Forget all that I have said to you before. Do not return until you have done your work. Do not come back to me until you can come content. Do not come to me with your splendid will broken. Let it triumph even over the will of a burr, not used to yielding, not easily giving up anything desired. This is almost the last letter I shall ever write to any man in all my life. I wonder who will read it. You, or all the world, perhaps. I wish it might rest with you at the last. Oh, let this thought lie with you as you sleep. You did not come back to me, and I rejoice that you did not. Tell me, why is it that I think of you lying where the wind is sweet in the trees? Why is it that I think of myself too, lying at last, with all my doubts composed, my restless ambitions ended, all my foolish dreams answered, in some place where the sound of the unceasing waters shall wash out from the memory of the world all my secrets and all my sins? Always I hear myself crying, I hope I shall not be unhappy, for I do not feel that I have been bad. Adieu, Meriwether Lewis, adieu. I am glad you can never read this. I am glad that you have not come back. I am glad that I have failed. End of Part 2, Chapter 10.
Part 2, Chapter 11 of The Magnificent Adventure. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sandra Cullum. The Magnificent Adventure by Emerson Hough. Chapter 11. The Bee. "Captain dear," said honest Patrick Gass, putting an arm under his wounded commander's shoulders as he eased his position in the boat. "You're not the man you was when you hit me that punch back yonder on the Ohio 3 years ago. Since you're so weak now, I have a good mind to return it to ye, with me compliments. 'Tis safer now." Gass chuckled at his own jest as his leader looked up at him. The boiling current of the great Missouri, bend after bend, vista after vista, had carried them down until at length they had reached the mouth of the Yellowstone, and had seen on ahead the curl of blue smoke on the beach, the encampment of their companions who were waiting for them here. These wonderful young men, these extraordinary wilderness travelers, had performed one more miracle. Separated by leagues of wild and unknown land, they met now casually, as though it were only what should be expected. Their feat would be difficult even today. William Clark, walking up and down along the bank, looking ever upstream for some sign of his friend, hurried down to meet the boats and gazed anxiously at the figure lifted in the arms of the men. "What's wrong, man?" he exclaimed. "Tell me." Lewis waved a hand at him in reassurance and smiled as his friend bent above him. "Nothing at all, Will," said he, "nothing at all. I was playing elk, and Cruzat thought it very lifelike. It is just a bullet through the thigh. The bone is safe, and the wound will soon heal. It is lucky that we are not on horseback now." By marvel, by miracle, the two friends were reunited once more, and surely around the campfires there were stories for all to tell. Sacagawea, the Indian girl, sat listening but briefly to all these tales of adventure, tales not new to one of her birth and education. Silently and without question, she took the place of nurse to the wounded commander. She had herbs of her own choosing, simple remedies which her people had found good for the treatment of wounds. as if the captain were her child, rather than the forsaken infant who lustily bemoaned his mother's absence from his tripod in the lodge. She took charge of the injured man until at length he made protest that he was as well as ever, and that they must go on. Again the paddles plied, again the bows of the canoes turned downstream. It seemed but a short distance thence to the Mandan villages, and once among the Mandans they felt almost as if they were at home. The Mandans received them as beings back from the grave. The drums sounded, the feast fires were lighted, and for a time the natives and their guests joined in rejoicing. But still Lewis's restless soul was dissatisfied with delay. He would not wait. "We must get on," said he. "We cannot delay. The boats must start down the last stretch of the great river. Would any of the tribesmen like to go to the far east to see the Great Father?" Big White, chief of the Mandans, said his savage prayers. "I will go," said he. "I will go and tell him of my people. We are poor and weak. I will ask him to take pity on us and protect us against the Sioux." So it was arranged that Big White and his women, with Jasom, his wife, and one or two others, should accompany the brigade down the river. Loud lamentations mingled with the preparations for the departure. Sacagawea, what of her? Her husband lived among the Mandans. This was the end of the trail for her, and not the rudest man but was sad at the thought of going on without her. They knew well enough that in all likelihood, but for her, their expedition could never have attained success. Beyond that, each man of them held memory of some personal kindness received at her hands. She had been the life and comfort of the party, as well as its guide and inspiration. "Sacagawea," said Meriwether Lewis when the hour for departure came, "I am now going to finish my trail. Do you want to go part way with us? I can take you to the village where we started up this river, St. Louis. You can stay there for one snow until Big White comes back from seeing the Great Father. We can take the baby too, if you like." Her face lighted up with a strange wistfulness. "Yes, Captain," said she, "I go with Big White. And you?" He smiled as he shook his head. "We go farther than that, many sleeps farther. Who shall make the fire? Who shall mend your moccasins? See, there is no other woman in your party. Who shall make tea? Who shall spread down the robes? Me, Mrs. Charbonneau." She drew herself up proudly with this title, but still Meriwether Lewis looked at her sadly as he stood, lean, gaunt, full-bearded, clad in his leather costume of the plains, supporting himself on his crutch. "Sacagawea," said he, "I cannot take your husband with me. All my goods are gone. I cannot pay him, and now we do not need him to teach us the language of other peoples. From here we can go alone." "All right," said Sacagawea in pale-face idiom. "Him stay. Me go." Meriwether Lewis pondered for a time on what fashion of speech he must employ to make her understand. "Birdwoman," said he at length, "you are a good girl. It would pain my heart to see you unhappy. But if you came with me to my villages, women would say, 'Who is that woman there? She has no lodge. She does not belong to any man.' They must not say that of Sacagawea. She is a good woman. Those are not the things your ears should hear. Now I shall tell the Great Father that, but for Sacagawea, we should all have been lost, that we should never have come back again. His heart will be open to those words. He will send gifts to you. Sometime I believe the Great Father's sons will build a picture of you in iron, out yonder at the parting of the rivers. It will show you pointing on ahead to show the way to the white men. Sacagawea must never die. She has done too much to be forgotten. Some day the children of the Great Father will take your baby, if you wish, and bring him up in the ways of the white men. What we can do for you we will do. Are my words good in your ears?" "Your words are good," said Sacagawea, "but I go too. No want to stay here now. no can stay. But here is your village, Sacagawea. This is your home, where you must live. You will be happier here. See now, when I sleep safe at night, I shall say, it was Sacagawea showed me the way. We did not go astray, we went straight. We will not forget who led us. But, she still expostulated, looking up at him, how can you cook? How can you make the lodge? One woman she must help all time. A spasm of pain crossed Lewis's face. Sacagawea, said he, I told you that I had made medicine, that I had promised my dream never to have a lodge of my own. Always I shall live upon the trail. No lodge fire in any village shall be the place for me, and I told you I had made a vow to my dream that no woman should light the lodge fire for me. You are a princess, the daughter of a chief, the sister of a chief, a great person. You know about a warrior's medicine. Surely then you know that no one is allowed to ask about the vows of a chief. By and by, he added gently, a great many white men will come here, Sacagawea. They will find you here. They will bring you gifts. You will live here long, and your baby will grow to be a man, and his children will live here long. But now I must go to my people. The unwanted tears of an Indian woman were in the eyes which looked up at him. Ah, said she in reproach, I went with you. I cooked in the lodges. I showed the way. I was one of your people. Now I say I go to your people, and you say no. You need me once. You no need me now. You say to me your people are not my people. You not need Sacagawea any more. The Indian has no word for goodbye. The faithful, nay, loving girl simply turned away and passed from him, nor did he ever see her more. Alone, apart from her people, she seated herself on the brink of the bluff, below which lay the boats ready to depart. She drew her blanket over her head. When at length the voyage had begun, she did not look out once to watch them pass. They saw her motionless figure high on the bank above them. The bird woman was mourning. The little Indian dog, Meriwether Lewis's constant companion, now, like Sacagawea, mercifully banished, sat at her side, as motionless as she. Both of them, mute and resigned, accepted their fate. But as for those others, those hardy men, now homeward bound, they were rejoicing. Speed was the cry of all the lusty paddlers, who, hour after hour, kept the boats hurrying down, aided by the current, and sometimes pushed forward by favourable winds. They were upon the last stretch of their wonderful journey. Speed, early and late, was all they asked. They were going home, back over the trail they had blazed for their fellows. Capitaine, Capitaine, look what I found. They were halting at noonday, far down the Missouri, for the boiling of the kettles. Lewis lay on his robes, still too lame to walk, watching his men as they scattered here and there after their fashion. It was Crusat who approached him, looking at something which the voyager held in his hand. "What is it, Crusat?" smiled Lewis. He was anxious always to be as kindly as possible to this unlucky follower, whose terrible mistake had well nigh resulted in the death of the leader. "Ouch, by gosh, he'll bite me with his tail. She's hot." Crusat held out his fingers a small but fateful object. It was a bee, an ordinary honey-bee. East of the Mississippi, in Illinois, Kentucky, the Virginias, it would have meant nothing. Here, on the Great Plains, it meant much. Meriwether Lewis held the tiny creature in the palm of his hand. "Why did you kill it, Crusat?" he asked. "It was on its errand." He turned to his friend who sat near at the other side. "Will," he said, "our expedition has succeeded. Here is the proof of it. The bee is following our path. They are coming." Clark nodded. Woodsmen as they both were, they knew well enough the Indian tradition that the bee is the harbinger of the coming of the white man. When he comes, The plough soon follows, and weeds grow where lately have been the flowers of the forest or the prairie. They sat for a time looking at the little insect, which bore so fateful a message into the west. Reverently, Lewis placed it in his collector's case, the first bee of the plains. "They are coming," said he again to his friend. End of Part 2, Chapter 11.
Part 2, Chapter 12 of The Magnificent Adventure. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Magnificent Adventure by Emerson Hough, Chapter 12. What Voice Had Called. They lay in camp far down the river whose flood had borne them on so rapidly. They had passed through the last of the dangerous country of the Sioux, defying the wild bands whose gauntlet they had to run, but which they had run in safety. Ahead was only what might be called a pleasure journey to the end of the river trail. The men were happy as they lay about their fires, which glowed dully in the dusk. Each was telling what he presently was going to do when he got his pay at old St. Louis not far below. William Clark, weary with the day's labor, had excused himself and gone to his blankets. Lewis, the responsible head of the expedition, alone, aloof, silent, sat moodily looking into his fire, the victim of one of his recurring moods of melancholy. He stared at length and raised himself restlessly. It was not unusual for him to be sleepless, and always, while awake, he had with him the problems of his many duties, but at this hour something unwontedly disturbing had come to Meriwether Lewis. He turned once more and bent down, as if figuring out some puzzle of a baffling trail. Picking up a bit of stick, he traced here and there in the ashes at his feet, points and lines, as if it were some problem in geometry. Uneasy, strange of look, now and again he muttered to himself. "Oh!" he exclaimed at length, almost like an Indian, as if in some definite conclusion. He had run his trail to the end, had finished the problem in the ashes. "Oh!" His voice again rumbled in his chest. And now he threw his tracing stick away. He sat, his head on one side, as if looking at some distant star. It seemed that he heard a voice calling to him in the night, so faintly that he could not be sure. His face, thin, gaunt, looked set and hard in the light of his little fire. Something stern, something wistful, too, showed in his eyes, frowning under the deep brows. Was Meriwether Lewis indeed gone mad? Had the hardships of the wilderness at last taken their toll on him, as had sometimes happened to other men? He rose, limping a little, for he still was weak and stiff from his wound, though disdaining staff or crutched bough to lean upon. He looked about him cautiously. The camp was slumbering. Here and there, stirred by the passing breeze, the embers of a little fire glowed like an eye in the dark. The men slept, some under their rude shelters, others in the open under the stars, each rolled in his robe, his rifle under the flap to keep it from the dew. Meriwether Lewis knew the place of every man in the encampment. Ordway, Pryor, Gass, each of the 3 sergeants slept by his own mess fire, his squad around him. McNeil, Bratton, Shields, Cruzet, Rubin, Fields, Goodrich, Whitehouse, Coulter, Shannon. The captain knew where each lay, rolled up like a mummy. He had marked each when he threw down his bedroll that night, for Meriwether Lewis was a leader of men, and no detail escaped him. He passed now, stealthy as an Indian, along the rows of sleeping forms. His moccasined foot made no sound, save for his uniform coat. He was clad as a savage himself, and his alert eye, his noiseless foot might have marked him one. He sought some one of these, and he knew where lay the man he wished to find. He stood beside him silently at last, looking down at the sleeping figure. The man lay a little apart from the others, for he was to stand second watch that night, and the second guard usually slept where he would not disturb the others when awakened for his turn of duty. This man, he was long and straight in his blankets, and filled them well, suddenly awoke and lay staring up. He had not yet been called, no hand had touched him. It was not yet time for guard relief, but he had felt a presence even as he slept. He stared up at a tall and motionless figure looking down. With a swift movement he reached for his rifle, but the next instant, even as he lay, his hand went to his forehead in salute. He was looking up into the face of his commander. "Shannon!" he heard a hoarse voice command him. "Get up!" George Shannon, the youngest of the party, sprang out of his bed half-clad. "Captain!" he saluted again. "What is it, sir?" he half-whispered, as if in apprehension. "Put on your jacket, Shannon. Come with me." Shannon obeyed hurriedly. Half-stripped, he stood a fine figure of young manhood himself, lithe, supple, yet developed into rugged strength by his years of labor on the trail. "What is it, Captain?" he inquired once more. They were apart from the others now in the shadows beyond Lewis's fire. Shannon had caught sight of his leader's countenance, noting the wildness of its look, its drawn and haggard lines. His commander's hand thrust in his face a clutch of papers, folded letters, they seemed to be. Shannon could see the trembling of the hand that held him. "You know what I want, Shannon. I want the rest of these. I want the last of them. Give it to me now." The youth felt on his shoulder the grip of a hand hard as steel. He did not make any answer, but stood dumb, wondering what might be the next act of this man who seemed half a madman. "5 of them," he heard the same hoarse voice go on. "There must be another, there must be one more at least. You have done this, you brought these letters. Give me the last one of them. Why don't you answer?" With sudden and violent strength, Lewis shook the boy as a dog might a rat. "Answer me." "Captain, I cannot," broke out Shannon. "What? Then there is another?" "I will not answer. I'll stand my trial before court-martial, if you please." Again the heavy hand on his shoulder. "There will be no trial," he heard the hoarse voice of his commander saying. "I cannot sleep. I must have the last one. There is another." Shannon laid a hand on the iron wrist. "How do you know?" he faltered. "Why do you think—" "Am I not your leader? Is it not my business to know? I am a woodsman. You thought you had covered your trail, but it was plain. I know you are the messenger who has been bringing these letters to me from her. I need not name her, and you shall not. For what reason you did this, by what plan, I do not know, but I know you did it. You were absent each time that I found one of these letters. That was too cunning to be cunning. You are young, Shannon. You have something to learn. You sing songs, love songs. You write letters, love letters, perhaps. You are Irish. You have sentiment. There is romance about you. You are the man she would choose to do what you have done. Being a woman, she knew. She chose well. But it is my business to read all these signs. Give me that letter. I am your officer. Captain, I will not. I will tell you I cannot sleep. Give it to me, boy, or by heaven you yourself shall sleep the long sleep here and now. What? You still refuse? Yes, I will not be driven to it. You say I'm Irish. I am. I will not give up a woman's secret. It is a question of honor, Captain. There is a woman concerned, as you know. Yes, and I promised her too. I swear I never planned any wrong to either of you. I would die at your order now, as you know. But you have no right to order this, and I will not answer. The hand closed at his throat. The boy could not speak, but still Meriwether Lewis growled on at him. Shannon, speak. Why have you kept secrets from your commanding officer? You have begun to tell me. Tell me all. The boy's hand clutched at his leader's wrists. At length, Lewis loosed him. Captain, began the victim, what do you mean? What can I do? I will tell you what I mean, Shannon. I promise to care for you and bring you back safe to your parents. You'll never see your parents again, save on one condition. I trusted you, thought you had special loyalty for me. Was I wrong? Oh, my honor, Captain, the boy broke out. I'd have died for you any time, and I'd do it now. I've worked my very best. You're my officer, my chief. With one movement, Meriwether Lewis flung off the uniform coat that he wore. They stood now man to man, stripped, and neither gave back from the other. Shannon, said Lewis, I'm not your officer now. I'm going to choke the truth out of you. Will you fight me, or are you afraid? The last cruelty was too much. The boy began to gulp. I'm not afraid to fight, sir. I'd fight any man. But you... No, I'll not do it. Even stripped, you are my commander still. Is that the reason? Not all of it. You're weak, Captain. Your wound has you in a fever. It would not be fair. I could do as I liked with you now. I'll not fight you. I couldn't. What? You will not obey me as your officer and will not fight me as a man? Do you want to be whipped? Do you want to be shot? Do you want to be drummed out of camp tomorrow morning? By heaven, Private Shannon, one of these choices will be yours. But something of the icy silence of the youth who heard these terrible words gave pause even to the madman that was Meriwether Lewis now. He halted, his hooked hands extended for the spring upon his opponent. What is it, boy? He whispered at last. What have I done? What did I say? Shannon was sobbing now. Captain, he said, and thrust a hand into the bosom of his tunic. Captain, for heaven's sake, don't do that. Don't apologize to me. I understand. Leave me alone. Here's the letter. There were 6. This is the last. Louis's strained muscles relaxed. His blazing eyes softened. Shannon, he whispered once more, what have I done? He took the letter in his hand but did not look at it, although his fingers could feel the seal unbroken. Why do you give it to me now, boy? He asked at length. What changed you? Because it's orders, sir. She ordered me, that is. She asked me to give you these letters at times when you seemed to need them most, when you were sick or in trouble, when anything had gone wrong. We couldn't figure so far on ahead when I ought to give you each one. I had to do my best. I didn't know at first, but now I see that you're sick. You're not yourself. You're in trouble. She told me not to let you know who carried them. He added rather inconsequently. She said that might end it all. She thought that you might come back. Come back? When? She didn't know. We couldn't any of us tell. It was all a guess. All this about the letters was left to me to do my best. I couldn't ask you, Captain, or anyone. I don't know what was in the letters, sir, and I don't ask you, for that's not my business. But I promised her. What did she promise you? Nothing. She didn't promise me pay because she knew I wouldn't have done it for pay. She only looked at me and she seemed sad. I don't know why. I couldn't help but promise her. I gave her my word of honor because she said her letters might be of use to you, but that no one else must know that she had written them. When was all this? At St. Louis, just before we started. I reckon she picked me out because she thought I was especially close to you. You know I have been so. Yes, I know, Shannon. I thought I was doing something for you. You see, she told me that her name must not be mentioned, that no one must know about this because it would hurt a woman's reputation. She thought the men would talk and that would be bad for you. I could not refuse her. Do you blame me now? No, Shannon, no. In all this, there is but one to blame, and that is your officer, myself. I did not think there was any harm in my getting the letters to you, Captain. I knew that lady was your friend. I know who she is. She was more beautiful than any woman in St. Louis. When we were there, more a lady, somehow. Of course, I'm not an officer or a gentleman. I'm only a boy from the backwoods and only a private soldier. I couldn't break my promise to her, and I couldn't very well obey your orders unless I did. If I've broken any of the regulations, you can punish me. You see, I held back this letter. I gave it to you now because I had the feeling that I ought to, that she would want me to. Is it the fever, sir? Aye, the fever. Silence fell as they stood there in the night. The boy went on, half tremblingly. Please, Captain Lewis, don't call me a coward. I don't believe I am. I was trying to do something for you, for both of you. It was always on my mind about those letters. I did my best, and now it was the eye of Meriwether Lewis that suddenly was wet. It was his voice that trembled. Boy, said he, I am your officer. Your officer asks your pardon. I have tried myself. I was guilty. Will you forget this? Not a word to a soul in the world, Captain, broke out Shannon. About a woman you see, we do not talk. No, Mr. Shannon, about a woman we gentlemen do not talk. But now tell me, boy, what can I do for you? What can I ever do for you? Nothing in the world, Captain, but just one thing. What is it? Please, sir, tell me that you don't think me a coward. A coward? "No, Shannon, you are the bravest fellow I ever met." The hand on the boy's shoulder was kindly now. The right hand of Captain Meriwether Lewis sought that of Private George Shannon. The madness of the trail, of the wilderness, the madness of absence and of remorse had swept by, so that Lewis once more was officer, gentleman, just a generous man. Shannon stooped and picked up the coat that his captain had cast from him. He held it up and aided his commander again to don it. Then, saluting, he marched off to his bivouac bed. From that day to the end of his life, no one ever heard George Shannon mention a word of this episode. Beyond the two leaders of the party, none of the expedition ever knew who had played the part of the mysterious messenger. Nor did anyone know later whence came the funds which eventually carried George Shannon through his schooling in the East, through his studies for the bar, and into the successful practice which he later built up in Kentucky's largest city. Meriwether Lewis, limp and lax now, shivering in the chill under the reaction from his excitement, turned away, stepped back to his own lodge, and contrived a little light after the frontier fashion, a rag wick in a shallow vessel of grease. With this uncertain aid, he bent down closer to read the finely written lines, which ran: "My friend, this is my last letter to you. This is the one I have marked number 6, the last one for my messenger. Yes, since you have not returned, now I know you never can. Rest well then, sir, and let me be strong to bear the news when at length it comes, if it ever shall come. Let the winds and the waters sound your requiem in that wilderness which you loved more than me, which you loved more than fame or fortune, honor or glory for yourself. The wilderness. It holds you, and for me, when at last I come to lay me down, I hope, too, some wilderness of wood or waters will be around me with its vast silences. After all, what is life? Such a brief thing. Little in it but duty done well and faithfully. I know you did yours while you lived. I have tried to do mine. It has been hard for me to see what was duty. If I knew as absolute truth that conviction now in my heart that you never can come back, how then could I go on? Meriwether, Mern, I have been calling to you. Have you not heard me? Can you not hear me now, calling to you across all the distances to come back to me? I cannot give you up to the world because I have loved you so much for myself. It was a cruel fate that parted us. More and more I know that, even as more and more I resolve to do what is my duty. But, oh, I miss you. Come back to me, to one who never was and never can be, but is. Yours, Theodosia." It took him long to read this letter. At last his trembling hand dropped the creased and broken sheets. The guttering light went out. The men were silent, sleeping near their fires. The peace of the great plains lay all about. She had said it, had said that last fated word. Now indeed he knew what voice had called to him across the deeps. He reflected now that all these messages had been written to him before he left her, and that when he saw her last she was standing, tears in her eyes, outraged by the act of the man whom she had trusted, nay, whom she had loved. End of Part 2, Chapter 12.
Part 2, Chapter 13 of The Magnificent Adventure. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sandra Cullum. The Magnificent Adventure by Emerson Hough. Chapter 13. The news. A horseman rode furiously over the new road from Fort Bellefontaine to St. Louis village. He carried news. The expedition of Lewis and Clark had returned. Yes, these men so long thought lost, dead, were coming even now with their own story, with their proofs. The boats had passed Charette, had passed Bellefontaine, and presently would be pulling up the river to the waterfront of St. Louis itself. "Run, boys," cried Pierre Chouteau to his servants. "Call out the people. Tell them to ring the bells. Tell them to fire the guns at the fort yonder. Captains Lewis and Clark have come back again, those who were dead." The little settlement was afire upon the instant. Laughing, talking, ejaculating, weeping in their joy, the people of St. Louis hurried out to meet the men whose voyage meant so much. At last they saw them coming, the paddles flashing in unison in the horny hands which tirelessly drove the boats along the river. They could see them, men with long beards, clad in leggings of elk hide, moccasins of buffalo and deer, their headdresses, those of the Indians, their long hair braided, and see, in the prow of the foremost craft sat two men, side by side, Lewis and Clark, the two friends who had arisen as if from the grave. "Present arms!" rang out a sharp command as the boats lined up along the wharf. The brown and scarred rifles came to place. "Aim! Fire!" The volley of salutation blazed out even with the chorus of the voyageurs' cheers, and cheers repeated and unceasing greeted them as they stepped from their boats to the wharf. In an instant they were half overpowered. "Come with me!" "No, with me! With me!" A score of eager voices of the first men of St. Louis claimed the privilege of hospitality for them. It was almost by force, but Pierre Chouteau bore them away to his castle on the hill, and always questions came upon them, ejaculations, exclamations. "Ma foi!" exclaimed more than one pretty French maiden. "Such men! Such splendid men! Savages, yet white! See! See!" They had gone away as youths, these two captains. They had come back, men. 4,000 miles out and back they had gone, over a country unmapped, unknown, and they brought back news of great new lands. Was it any wonder that they stood now, grave and dignified, feeling almost for the first time the weight of what they had done? They passed over the boat landing and across the wharf, approaching the foot of the rocky bluff above, which lay the long street of St. Louis. Silent, as was his wont, Meriwether Lewis had replied to most of the greetings, only with the smile which so lighted up his face. But now, suddenly, he ceased even to smile. His eye rested not upon the faces of those acclaiming friends, but upon something else beyond them. Yes, there it was, the old fur shed, the storage house of the traders, here on the wharf, just as he had left it 2 years before. The door was closed. What lay beyond it? Lewis shuddered, as if caught with chill, as he looked at yonder door. Just there she had stood, more than 2 years ago, when he started out on this long journey. There he had kissed that face which he had left in tears. He saw it now, all the glory of his safe return, all the wonderful results which it must mean he would have given now could he have had back that picture for a different making. "My matches, my thermometers, my instruments, how did they perform?" The speaker was Dr. Saugrand, eager to meet again his friends. "Perfect, Doctor, perfect. We have some of the matches yet. As to the thermometers, we broke the last one before we reached the sea." "You found the sea? Mon Dieu!" "We found the Pacific. We found the Columbia, the Yellowstone, many new rivers. We have found a new continent, made a new geography. We passed the head of the Missouri. We found 3 great mountain ranges." "The beaver, did you find the beaver yonder?" demanded the voice of a swarthy man who had attended them. It was Manuel Lisa, fur trader, his eyes glowing in his interest in that reply. "Beaver?" William Clark waved a hand. "How many I could not tell you. Thousands and millions. More beaver than ever were known in the world before. Millions of buffalo, elk in droves, bears such as you never saw, antelope, great horned sheep, otters, muskrat, mink, the greatest fur country in all the world. We could not tell you half." "Your men, will they be free to make return up the river with trading parties?" William Clark smiled at the keenness of the old French trader. You could not possibly have better men, said he. The men themselves shook their heads in despair. Yes, they said, they had found 1,000 miles of country ready to be ploughed. They had found any quantity of hardwood forests and pine groves. They had seen rivers packed with fish until they were half solid, more fish than ever were in all the world before. They had found great rivers which led far back to the heart of the continent. They had seen trees larger than any man ever had seen, so large that they hardly could be felled by an axe. They had found a country where in the winter men perished, and another where the winters were not cold, and where the bushes grew high as trees. They had found all manner of new animals never known before. In short, a new world. How could they tell of it? "Captain," inquired Chouteau at length, "your luggage, your boxes, where are they?" Meriwether Lewis pointed to a skin parfleche and a knotted bandana handkerchief which George Shannon carried for him. "That is all I have left," said he. "But the mail for the East, the mail, Monsieur Chouteau. We must get word to the President." "The President has long ago been advised of your death," said Chouteau, laughing. "All the world has said goodbye to you. No doubt you can read your own obituaries." "We bring them better news than that. What news for us?" asked the two captains of their host. "News!" The voluble Frenchman threw up his hands. "Nothing but news. The entire world is changed since you left. I could not tell you in a month. The Burr duel." "Yes, we did not know of it for 2 years," said William Clark. "We have just heard about it up river." "The killing of Mr. Hamilton ended the career of Colonel Burr," said Chouteau. "But for that we might have different times here in Mississippi. He had many friends. But you have heard the last news regarding him?" It was the dark eye of Meriwether Lewis which now compelled his attention. "No? Well, he came out here through his country once more. He was arrested last summer on the Natchez Trace and carried off to Washington. The charge is treason against his government. The country is full of it. His trial is to be at Richmond. Even now it may be going on." He did not notice the sudden change in Meriwether Lewis's face. "And all the world is swimming in blood across the sea," went on their garrulous informant. "Napoleon and Great Britain are at war again. Were it not so, one or the other of them would be at the gates of New Orleans, that is sure. This country is still discontented. There was much in the plan of Colonel Burr to separate this valley into a country of its own, independent, to force a secession from the Republic, even though by war on the flag. Indeed, he was prepared for that, but now his conspiracy is done. Perhaps, however, you do not hold with the theory of Colonel Burr." "Hold with the theory of Colonel Burr, sir!" exclaimed the deep voice of Meriwether Lewis. "Hold with it? This is the first time I have known what it was. It was treason. If he had any join him, that was in treason. He sought to disrupt this country. Agree with him? What is this you tell me? I had never dreamed such a thing as possible of him." "He had many friends," went on Chouteau, "very many friends. They are scattered even now all up and down this country, men who will not give up their cause. All those men needed was a leader." "But, Monsieur Chouteau," rejoined Lewis, "I do not understand. I cannot. What Colonel Burr attempted was an actual treason to this republic. I find it difficult to believe that." Chouteau shrugged his shoulders. "There may be 2 names for it," he said, "and everyone asked to join the cause was asked to join in treason to his country. Is it not so?" Lewis went on. "There may be 2 names for it," smiled the other, still shrugging. "He was my friend," said Meriwether Lewis. "I trusted him." "Always, I repeat, there are 2 names for treason. But what puzzles me is this," Chouteau continued. "What halted the cause of Colonel Burr here in the West? He seemed to be upon the point of success. His organization was complete. His men were in New Orleans. He had great lands purchased as a rendezvous below. He had understandings with foreign powers, that is sure. Well then, here is Colonel Burr at St. Louis, all his plans arranged. He is ready to march, to commence his campaign, to form this valley into a great kingdom with Mexico as part of it. He was a man able to make plans, believe me. But of all this, there comes nothing. Why? At the last point, something failed. No one knew what. He waited for something. No one knew what. Something lacked. No one can tell what. And all the time, this is most curious to me, I learned it through others. Colonel Burr was eager to hear something of the expedition of Lewis and Clark into the West. Why? No one knows. Does no one know? The captain did not speak, and Chouteau presently went on. Why did Colonel Burr hesitate? Why did he give up his plans here? Why, indeed, did he fail? You ask me why these things were. I say it was because of you, messieurs. You 2 young men, with your Lewis and Clark expedition. It was you who broke the Burr conspiracy, for so they call it these days. Messieurs, that is your news. End of Part 2, Chapter 13.
Part 2, Chapter 14 of The Magnificent Adventure. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Mike Manolakes. The Magnificent Adventure by Emerson Hough. Part 2, Chapter 14. The Guests of a Nation. Attention, men! The company of Volunteers for the Discovery of the West fell into line in front of the stone fortress of Old St. Louis. A motley crew they looked in their half-savage garb. They were veterans, fit for any difficult undertaking in the wilderness. Shoulder to shoulder they had labored in the great enterprise. Now they were to disband. Their leaders had laid aside the costume of the frontier and assumed the uniforms of officers in the Army of the United States. Fresh from his barber and his tailor, Captain Lewis stood tall, clean-limbed, immaculate, facing his men. His beard was gone, his face showed paler where it had been reaped. His hair, grown quite long and done now in formal queue, hung low upon his shoulders. In every line a gentleman, an officer, and a thoroughbred, he no longer bore any trace of the wilderness. Love, confidence, admiration, these things showed in the faces of his men as their eyes turned to him. Men, said he, you are to be mustered out today. There will be given to each of you a certificate of service in this expedition. It will entitle you to 320 acres of land, to be selected where you like west of the Mississippi River. You will have double pay in gold as well, but it is not only in this way that we seek to show appreciation of your services. We have concluded a journey of considerable length and importance. Between you and your officers there have been such relations as only could have made successful a service so extraordinary as ours has been. In our reports to our own superior officers, we shall have no words save those of praise for any of you. Our expedition has succeeded. To that success you have all contributed. Your officers thank you. Captain Clark will give you your last command, men. As I say farewell to you, I trust I may not be taken to mean that I separate myself from you in my thoughts or memories. If I can ever be of service to any of you, you will call upon me freely. He turned and stepped aside. His place was taken by his associate, William Clark, likewise a soldier, an officer, properly attired, and all the figure of a proper man. Clark's voice rang sharp and clear. Attention! Aim! Fire! Break ranks! March! The last volley of the gallant little company was fired. The last order had been given and received. With a sweep of his drawn sword, Captain Clark dismissed them. The expedition was done. So now they went their way, most of them into oblivion, great though their services had been. For their officers much more remained to do. The progress to Washington was a triumph. Everywhere their admiring countrymen were excited over their marvelous journey. They were feted and honored at every turn. The country was ringing with their praises from the Mississippi to the Atlantic, as the news spread eastward just ahead of them. When at last they finished their adieu to the kindly folk of St. Louis, who scarce would let them go, they took boat across the river to the old Kaskaskia Trail, and crossed the Illinois country by horse to the falls of the Ohio, where the family of William Clark awaited him. Here was much holiday, be sure, but not even here did they pause long, for they must be on their way to meet their chief at Washington. Their little cavalcade, growing larger now, passed on across Kentucky, over the gap in the Cumberlands, down into the country of the Virginia gentry. Here again they were feted and dined and wined so long as they would tarry. It was especially difficult for them to leave Colonel Hancock at Fincastle. Here they must pause and tell how they had named certain rivers in the west, the one for Maria Woods, another for Judith Hancock, the Marias and Judith rivers of our maps today. Here William Clark delayed yet a time. He had found in the charms of the fair Judith herself somewhat to give him pause. Soon he was to take her as his bride down the Ohio to yonder town of St. Louis, for whose fame he had done so much and was to do so much more. Toward none of the fair maids who now flocked about them could Meriwether Lewis be more than smiling gallant, though rumors ran that either he or William Clark might well nigh take his pick. He was alike to all of them in his courtesy. One thought of eager and unalloyed joy rested with him. He was soon to see his mother. In time he rode down from the hilltops of old Albemarle to the point beyond the Ivy Depot, where rose the gentle eminence of Locust Hill, the plantation of the Lewis family. Always in the afternoon, in all weathers, his mother sat looking down the long lane to the gate, as if she expected that one day a certain figure would appear. Sometimes, old as she was, she dozed and dreamed. Just now she had done so. She awoke and saw standing before her, as if pictured in her dream, the form of her son in bodily presence, although at first she did not accept him as such. "My son," said she at length, half as much in terror as in joy. "Mern!" He stooped down and took her grayed head in his hands as she looked up at him. She recalled other times when he had come from the forest, from the wilderness, bearing trophies in his hands. He bore now trophies greater, perhaps, than any man of his age ever had brought home with him. What Washington had defended was not so great as that which Lewis won. It required them both to make an America for us haggling and unworthy followers. "My son," was all she could say. "They told me that you never would come back, that you were dead. I thought the wilderness had claimed you at last, Mern." "I told you I should come back to you safe, mother. There was no danger at any time. From St. Louis I have come as fast as any messenger could have come. Next I must go see Mr. Jefferson at Washington, then back home again to talk with you for long, long hours." "And what have you found?" "More than I can tell you in a year. We found the mysterious river, the Columbia, found where it runs into the ocean, where it starts in the mountains. We found the head of the Missouri. The Ohio is but a creek beside it. We crossed plains and mountains more wonderful than any we have ever dreamed of. We saw the most wonderful land in all the world, mother, and we made it ours." "And you did that? Mern, was that why the wilderness called to you? My boy has done all that? Your country will reward you. I should not complain of all these years of absence. You are happy now, are you not?" "I should be the happiest of men. I can take to Mr. Jefferson, our best friend, the proof that he was right in his plans. His great dream has come true, and I in some part helped to make it true. Should I not now be happy?" "You should be, Mern, but are you?" "I am well, and I find you still well and strong. My friend Will Clark has come back with me hearty as a boy. Everything has been fortunate with us. Look at me," he demanded, turning and stretching out his mighty arms. "I am strong. My men all came through without loss or injury, the splendid fellows. It is wonderful that in risks such as ours we met with no ill fortune." "Yes, but are you happy? Turn your face to me." But he did not turn his face. "I told my friend William Clark," he said lightly as he rose, "to join me here after an hour or so. I think I see his party coming now. York rides ahead, do you see? He is a free Negro now. He will have stories enough to set all our blacks idle for a month. I must go down and meet Will and our other guests." William Clark, bubbling over with his own joy of life, set all the household in a whirl. There was nothing but cooking, festivity, dancing, hilarity, so long as he remained at Locust Hill. But the mother of Meriwether Lewis looked with jealous eye on William Clark. Success, glory, honor, fame, reward, these now belonged to Meriwether Lewis, to them both, his mother knew. But why did not his laugh sound high like that of his friend? Her eyes followed her son daily, hourly, until at last she surrendered him to his duty when he declared he could no longer delay his journey to Washington. Spick and span, cap a pie, pictures of splendid young manhood, the two captains rode one afternoon up to the great gate before the mansion house of the nation. Lewis looked about him at scenes once familiar, but in the 3 years and a half since he had seen it last, the raw town had changed rapidly. Workmen had done somewhat upon the Capitol building yonder. Certain improvements had been made about the executive mansion itself. But the old Negro men at the gate and at the door of the house were just as he had left them. And when, running on ahead of his companion, he knocked at Mr. Jefferson's office door, flinging it open as he did so, with the freedom of his old habit, he looked in upon a familiar sight. Thomas Jefferson was sitting bent over his desk, as usual littered with 1,000 papers. The long frame of his multigraph copying machine was at one side. Folded documents lay before him, unfinished briefs upon the other side. A rack of goose quills and an open inkpot stood beyond. And on top of the desk, spread out long and over all, lay a great map, whose identity these two young men easily could tell, the Lewis and Clark map sent back from the Mandan country. Thomas Jefferson had kept it at his desk every day since it had come to him more than 2 years before. He turned now toward the door, casually, for he was used to the interruptions of his servants. What he saw brought him to his feet. He spread out his arms impulsively. He shook the hand of each in turn, drew them to him before he motioned them to seats. Never had Meriwether Lewis seen such emotion displayed by his chief. "I could hardly wait for you," said Mr. Jefferson. He began to pace up and down. I knew it! He exclaimed. "Now they will call us constitutional, perhaps, since we have added a new world to our country. My son, that was our vision. You have proved it. You have been both dreamer and doer." He came up and placed a half-playful hand on Meriwether Lewis's shoulder. "Did I know men then?" he demanded. "And did I, Mr. Jefferson, Captain Clark?" "You do not say the title correctly. It is not Captain Clark. It is not Captain Lewis that stand before me now. You are to have 1,600 acres of land, each of you. You, my son, will be Governor Lewis of the new territory of Louisiana. And your friend is not Captain Clark, but General Clark, agent of all the Indian tribes of the West." In silence, the hand of each of the young men went out to the president. Then their own eyes met in their hands. They were not to be separated after all. They were to work together yonder in St. Louis. "Governor, General, I welcome you back. You will come back to your old rooms here in my family, Mern, and we will find a place for your friend. What we have here is at the service of both of you. You are the guests of the nation." End of Part 2, Chapter 14.
Part 2, Chapter 15 of The Magnificent Adventure. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ritu, Canada. The Magnificent Adventure by Emerson Hough. Mr. Jefferson's Advice. "Mern, my boy," said Thomas Jefferson, when at length they two were alone once more in the little office, "I cannot say what your return means to me. You come as one from the grave, you resurrect another from the grave." "Meaning, Mr. Jefferson? You surely have heard that my administration is in sad disrepute. There is no man in the country hated so bitterly as myself. We are struggling on the very verge of war. I heard some talk in the West, Mr. Jefferson," hesitated Meriwether Lewis. "Yes, they call this Louisiana Purchase, on which I had set my heart, nothing but extravagance. The machinations of Colonel Burr have added nothing to its reputation. General Jackson is with Burr and many other strong friends, and meantime you know where Burr himself is? In the Richmond jail. I understand that his friend Mr. Merry has gone yonder to visit him. Our country is degenerated to be no more than a scheming ground, a plotting place for other powers. You come back just in the nick of time. You have saved this administration. You bring back success with you. If the issue of your expedition were anything else, I scarce know what would be my own case here. For myself, that would have mattered little. But as to this country for which I have planned so much, your failure would have cost us all the Mississippi Valley, besides all the valley of the Missouri and the Columbia. Yes, had you not succeeded, Aaron Burr would have succeeded. Instead of a great republic reaching from ocean to ocean, we should have had a scattered coterie of states of no endurance, no continuity, no power. Thank God for the presence of one great splendid thing gloriously done. You cannot, do not begin to measure its importance. We are glad that you have been pleased, Mr. Jefferson, said Lewis simply. Pleased? Pleased? Say rather that I am saved. Say rather that this country is saved. Had you proved disloyal to me, had you for any cause turned back, he went on, think what had been the result. What a load, although you knew it not, was placed on your shoulders. Suppose that you had turned back on the trail last year or the summer before. Suppose you had not gotten beyond the Mandans. Can you measure the difference for this republic? Can you begin to see what responsibility rested on you? Had you failed, you would have dragged the flag of your country in the dust. Had you come back any time before you did, then you might have called yourself the man who ruined his president, his friend, his country. And I nearly did, Mr. Jefferson, broke out Meriwether Lewis. Do not praise me too much. I was tempted. The old man turned toward him, his face grave. You are honest. I value that above all in you. You are punctilious to have no praise, not honestly won. Listen now. He leaned toward the young man who sat beside him. I knew all along how you were tempted. She came here, Theodosia, the very day you left. Lewis nodded, mute. In some way I knew the conspirators fought against your success and mine. I knew what agencies they intended to use against you. It was this woman. Had you failed, I should have known why. I know many things, whether or not you do. I know the character of Aaron Burr well enough. He has been crazed, carried away by his own ambitions. God alone knows where he would have stopped. He has been a man not surpassed in duplicity. He would stop at nothing. Moreover, he could make black look white. He did so for his daughter. She believed in him absolutely. And knowing somewhat of his plans, I imagined that he would use the attraction of that young lady for you, the power which, all things considered, she might be supposed to possess with you. I knew the depth of your regard for her, the deeper for its hopelessness, and more than all, I knew the intentness and resolution of your character. It was one motive against the other. Which was the stronger? You were a young man. The hot blood of youth was yours, and I know its power. Had the woman not been married, I should have lost. You would have sold a crown for her. It was honor saved you, your personal honor. That was what brought us success. No country is bigger than the personal honor of its gentlemen. The bowed head of Meriwether Lewis was his only answer. The keen-faced old man went on. I knew that before you had left the mouth of the Ohio River, he would do his best to stop you. I knew it before you had left Harper's Ferry, but I placed the issue in the lap of the gods. I applied to you all the tests, the severest tests, that one man can to another. I let you alone. For a year, 2 years, 3 years, I did not know. But now I do know. And the answer is yonder flag, which you have carried from one ocean to the other. The answer is in this map. All these hides scrawled in coal, all those new thousands of miles of land, our land. God keep it safe for us always, and may the people one day know who really secured it for them. It was not so much Thomas Jefferson as it was Meriwether Lewis. Each time I dreamed that my subtle enemies were tempting you, I prayed in my own soul that you would be strong, that you would go on, that you would be loyal to your duty, no matter what the cost. God answered those prayers, my boy. Whatever was your need, whatever price you paid, you did what I prayed you would do. When the months passed and you did not come back, I knew that not even the woman you loved could have called you back. I knew that you had learned the priceless lessons of renunciation, of sacrifice, through which alone the great deeds of the world always have been done. Meriwether Lewis stood before his chief, cold and pale, unable to complete much speech. Thomas Jefferson looked at him for a moment before he went on. My boy, you are so simple that you will not understand. You do not understand how well I understand you. These things are not done without cost. If there was punishment for you, you took that punishment, or you will. You kept your oath as an officer and your unwritten oath as a gentleman. It is a great thing for a man to have his honor altogether unsullied. Mr. Jefferson, the young man before him, lifted a hand. His face was ghastly pale. Do not, said he, do not, I beg of you. What is it, Mern? Exclaimed the old man. What have I done? You speak of my honor. Do not. Indeed, you touch me deep. Thomas Jefferson, wise old man, raised a hand. I shall never listen, my son, said he. I will accord to you the right of hot blood to run hot. You would not be a man worth knowing were it not so. All I know or will know is that whatever the price you have paid it, or will pay it. But tell me, Mern, can you not tear her from your soul? It will ruin you. This hopeless attachment which you cherish, is it always to remain with you? I bid you find some other woman. The best in the land are waiting for you. Mr. Jefferson, I shall never marry. The two sat looking into each other's eyes for just a moment. Said Thomas Jefferson at length, slowly, So, you have come back with all happiness, all success for me and for others, but not for yourself? Such proving as you have had has fallen to the lot of but few men. I know now how great has been the cost. I see it in your face. The 15 millions I paid for yonder lands was nothing. We have bought them with the happiness of a human soul, the transient gratitude of this republic, the honor of that little paper. Bah, they are nothing. But perhaps it may be something for you to know that at least one friend understands. Lewis did not speak. What is lost is lost. The president began again after a time. What is broken is broken. But see how clearly I look into your soul. You are not thinking now of what you can do for yourself. You are not thinking of your new rank, your honors. You are asking now at this moment what you can do for her. Is it not so? The smile that came upon the young man's face was a beautiful, a wonderful thing to see. It made the wise old man sad to see it, but thoughtful too. She is at Richmond, Mern? Said Mr. Jefferson a moment later. The young man nodded, and the greatest boon she could ask would be her father's freedom, the freedom of the man who sought to ruin this country, the man whom I scarcely dare release. The thin lips compressed for a moment. It was not in implacable, vengeful zeal, it was but in thought. Now then, said Thomas Jefferson sharply, there comes a veil, a curtain, between you and me, and all the world. No record must show that either of us raised a hand against the full action of the law, or planned that Colonel Burr should not suffer the full penalty of the code. Yes, for him that is true, but not for his daughter. Mr. Jefferson, the face of Meriwether Lewis was strangely moved. I see the actual greatness of your soul, but I ask nothing. Why, in my heart I feel like flinging open every prison door in the world. If you have gained an empire for your country, and paid for it as you have, could not a great and rich country afford to pay to the extent of a woman's happiness? When a king is crowned, he sets free the criminals, and this day I feel as proud and happy as if I were a king, and king of the greatest empire of all the world. I know well who assured that kingdom. Let me be then, he raised his long hand, say nothing, do nothing. and let this and all talk between us of these matters. I know you can keep your own counsel." Lewis bowed silently. "Go to Richmond, Mern. You will find there a broken conspirator and his unhappy daughter. Both are ostracized. None is so poor as to do either of them reverence. She has no door open to her now, though but lately she was daughter of the Vice President, the rich Mrs. Alston, wife of the Governor of her state. Go to them now. Tell Colonel Burr that the President will not ask mercy for him. John Marshall is on the bench there, but before him is a jury. John Randolph is foreman of that jury. It is there that case will be tried, in the jury room, and politics will try it. Go to Theodosia, Mern, in her desperate need." "But what can I do, Mr. Jefferson?" broke out his listener. "Do precisely what I tell you. Go to that social outcast. Take her on your arm before all the world and before that jury. Sit there before all Richmond and that jury. An hour or so will do. Do that, and then, as I did when I trusted you, ask no questions, but leave it on the knees of the gods. If you can call me chief in other matters," the President concluded, "and can call me chief in that fashion of thought which men call religion as well, let me give you unction and absolution, my son. It is all that I have to give to one whom I have always loved as if he were my own son. This is all I can do for you. It may fail, but I would rather trust that jury to be right than trust myself today, because I repeat, I feel like flinging open every prison door in all the world and telling every erring, stumbling man to try once more to do what his soul tells him he ought to do." End of Part 2, Chapter 15. Part 2, Chapter 16 of The Magnificent Adventure. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ritu, Canada. The Magnificent Adventure by Emerson Hough. Part 2, Chapter 16. The Quality of Mercy. In Richmond jail lay Aaron Burr, the great conspirator, the ruins of his ambition fallen about him. He had found a prison instead of a palace. He was eager no longer to gain a scepter, but only to escape a noose. The great conspiracy was at an end. The only question was of the punishment the accused should have, for in the general belief he was certain of conviction. That he never was convicted has always been one of the most mysterious facts of a mysterious chapter in our national development. So crowded were the hostelries of Richmond that a stranger would have had difficulty in finding lodging there during the 6 months of the Burr trial. Not so with Meriwether Lewis, now one of the country's famous men. A score of homes opened their doors to him. The town buzzed over his appearance. He had once been the friend of Burr, always the friend of Jefferson. To which side now would he lean? Luther Martin, chief of Burr's council, was eager above all to have a word with Meriwether Lewis, so close to affairs in Washington, possibly so useful to himself. Washington Irving, too, assistant to Martin in the great trial, would gladly have had talk with him. All asked what his errand might be. What was the leaning of the governor of the new territory, a man closer to the administration at Washington than any other? Meriwether Lewis kept his own counsel. He arranged first to see Burr himself. The meagerly furnished anteroom of the federal prison in Richmond was the discredited adventurers' reception hall in those days. Burr advanced to meet his visitor with something of his own old haughtiness of mien, a little of the former brilliance of his eye. "Governor, I am delighted to see you back safe and sound from your journey." "My congratulations, sir." Meriwether Lewis made no reply, but gazed at him steadily, well aware of the stinging sarcasm of his words. "I have few friends now," said Aaron Burr. "You have many. You are on the flood tide. It ebbs for me. When one loses, what mercy is shown to him? That scoundrel Mary, he promised everything and gave nothing. Urujo, he is worse yet in his treachery. Even the French minister Turreau, who surely might listen to the wishes of the great French population of the Mississippi Valley, pays no attention to their petitions whatever, and none to mine. These were my former friends. I promised them a country. You promised them a country, Colonel Burr. From what? From that great ownerless land yonder, the West. But they waited and waited until your success was sure. Why, that scoundrel Mary is here this very day. The effrontery of him. He wants nothing more to do with me. No, he is here to undertake to recoup himself in his own losses by reasons of moneys he advanced to me some time ago. He is importuning my son-in-law, Mr. Alston, to pay him back those funds, which once he was so ready to furnish to us. But Mr. Alston is ruined. I am ruined. We are all ruined. No, they waited too long. They waited until it was too late. Yes, Lewis returned. That country is American now, not British or Spanish or French. Our men are passing across the river in thousands. They will never lose their hold on the West. It was treason to the future that you planned, but it was hopeless from the first. It would seem, sir, said Aaron Burr, a cynical smile twisting his thin lip, that I may not count upon your friendship. That is a hard speech, Colonel Burr. I was your friend, more than your chief ever was. I fancy Mr. Jefferson would like to see me pilloried, drawn, and quartered after the old way. You are unjust to him. You struck at the greatest ambition of his life, struck at his heart and the heart of his country, when you undertook to separate the West from this republic. I am a plain man and a busy man, said Aaron Burr coldly. I must employ my time now to the betterment of my situation. I have failed and you have won, but let me throw the cloak aside, since I know you can be of no service to me. I care not what punishment you may have, what suffering, because I recognize in you the one great cause of my failure. It was you, sir, with your cursed expedition that defeated Aaron Burr. He turned proud and defiant even in his failure, and when Meriwether Lewis looked up, he was gone. Even as Burr passed, Meriwether Lewis heard a light step in the long corridor. Under guard of the turnkey, someone stood at the door. It was the figure of a woman, a figure which caused him to halt, caused his heart to leap. She came toward him now, all in mourning black hat, gown, and gloves. Her face was pale, her eyes deep, her mouth drooping. Theodosia Alston was always thus on her daily visit to her father's cell. Herself the picture of failure and despair. She was used to avoiding the eyes of all, but she saw Meriwether Lewis standing before her, strong, tall, splendid in his manhood and vigor, in the full tide of his success. She was almost in touch of his hand when she raised her eyes to his. These two had met at last. After what far wanderings apart, they had met as if each came from the valley of the shadows, out of the vastness of the unknown, over all those long and devious trails, into what now seemed to him a world still more vast, more fraught with desperate peril. He had come back to her, and she, what had been her perils? What were her thoughts? As his eye fell upon her, even as his keen ear had known her coming, the hand of Meriwether Lewis half unconsciously went to his breast. He felt under it the packet of faded letters which he had so long kept with him, which in some way he felt to be his talisman. Yes, it was for this that he had had them, his love and hers. This had been his shield through all. What he saw in her grave face, her mournful eyes uplifted to his own, this was the solution of the riddle of his life, the reason for his moods of melancholy, the answer to 1,000 unspoken prayers. He felt his heart thrill strong and full, felt his blood spring in strong current through his veins, until they strained, until he felt his nerves tingle as he stood, silent, endeavoring to still the tumult within him, now that he knew the great and satisfying truth of truths. To her he was what? A tall and handsome gentleman, immaculately clad, governor of the newest of our territories, the largest and richest realm ever laid under the rule of any viceroy. A bystander might have pondered on such things, but Meriwether Lewis had no thought of them, nor had the woman who looked up at him. No, to her eyes there stood only the man who made her blood leap, her soul cry out, Yeah, now I know. To her also, from the divine compassion, was given answer for her questionings. She knew that life for her, even though it ended now, had been no blind puzzle, after all, but was a glorious and perfect thing. She had called to him across the deep, and he had heard and come. From the very grave itself he had arisen and come again to her. Even here under the shadow of the gallows, even if, as both knew in their supreme renunciation, they must part and never meet again, for them both there could be peaceful calm, with all life's questions answered beautifully and surely answered, never again to rise for conquering. Sir, Captain, that is to say, Governor Lewis, she corrected herself, I was not expecting you. Her tone seemed icy, though her soul was in her eyes. She was all upon the defense, as Lewis instantly understood. He took her hand in both of his own and looked into her face. She gazed up at him, and swiftly, mercifully the tears came. Gently, as if she had been a child, he dried them for her, as once, when a boy, he had promised to do. They were alone now. The cold silence of the prison was about them, but their own long silence seemed a golden glowing thing. Thus only in their silence could they speak. They did not know that they stood hand in hand. My husband is not here, said she at length, gently disengaging her hand from his. No one knows me now. Everyone avoids me. You must not be seen with me, a pariah, an outcast. I am my father's only friend. Already they condemn him, yet he is as innocent as any man ever was. I shall say no word to change that belief, said Meriwether Lewis. But your husband is not here? It is he whom I must see at once. Why must you see him? You must know. It is my duty to go to him and to tell him that I am the man who made you weep. He must have his satisfaction. Nothing that he can do will punish me, as my own conscience has already punished me. It is no use. I shall not ask you to forgive me. I will not be so cheap. But suppose he does not know? He could only stand silent, regarding her fixedly. He must never know, she went on. It is no time for quixotism, to make yet another suffer. We, too, must be strong enough to carry our own secret. It is better and kinder that it should be between two than among three. I thought you dead. Let the past remain past. Let it bury its own dead. It is our time of reckoning, said he, at length. Guilty as I have been, sinning as I have sinned, tell me, was I alone in the wrong? Listen, those who joined your father's cause were asked to join in treason to their country. What he purposed was treason. Tell me, did you know this when you came to me? He saw the quick pain upon her face, the flush that rose to her pale cheek. She drew herself up proudly. I shall not answer that, said she. No, he exclaimed, swiftly contrite, nor shall I ask it. Forgive me. You never knew. You were innocent. You do right not to answer such a question. I only wanted you to be happy. That was my one desire. She looked aside, and a moment passed before she heard his deep voice reply. Happy? I am the most unhappy man in all the world. Happiness? No rags, shreds, patches of happiness. That is all that is left of happiness for us, as men and women usually count it. But tell me, what would make you most happy now, of these things remaining? I have come back to pay my debts. Is there anything I can do? What would make you happiest? My father's freedom? I cannot promise that, but all that I can do I will. Were my father guilty, that would be the act of a noble mind. But how? You are Mr. Jefferson's friend, not the friend of Aaron Burr. All the world knows that. Precisely, all the world knows that, or thinks it does. It thinks it knows that Mr. Jefferson is implacable. But suppose all the world were set to wondering? I am just wondering myself if it would be right to suborn a juryman like John Randolph of Roanoke. That is impossible. What do you mean? I mean this afternoon you and I will go into the trial room together. I have not yet attended a session of the court. Today I will hand you to your seat in full sight of the jury box. You give your presents to one who is now a social pariah? The ladies of Richmond no longer speak to me. But to what purpose? Perhaps to small purpose, I cannot tell. But let us suppose that I go with you and that we sit there in sight of all. I am known to be the intimate friend of Mr. Jefferson, ergo, Mr. Jefferson is not hostile to us. And you would do that, you would take that chance? For you? And he did, for her. That afternoon all the crowded courtrooms saw the beadle make way for two persons of importance. One was a tall, grave, distinguished-looking man, impassive, calm, a man whose face was known to all, the new governor of Louisiana, viceroy of the country that Burr had lost. Upon his arm, pale, clad all in black, walked the daughter of the prisoner at the bar. Was it in defiance or in compliance that this act was done? Was it by orders or against orders or without orders that the president's best friend walked in public before all the world with the daughter of the president's worst enemy? It was the guess of anybody and the query of all. There, in full view of all the attendants, in full view of the jury, and of John Randolph of Roanoke, its foremen, sat the two persons who had had most to do with this scene of which they now made a part. There sat the man who had explored the Great West, and the woman who had done her best to prevent that exploration. Mr. Jefferson's friend and the daughter of the great conspirator, Aaron Burr. Ergo, ergo, said many tongues swiftly, and leaned head to whisper it. Mind sometimes speaks to mind, even across the rail of a jury box. Sympathy runs deep and swift sometimes. All the world loved Meriwether Lewis then, would favor him, or favor what he favored. The issue of that great trial was not to come for weeks as yet, but when it came, and by whatever process, Aaron Burr was acquitted of the charges brought against him. The republic for whose downfall he had plotted set him free and bade him begone. But now, at the close of this day, the two central figures of the tragic drama found themselves together once more. They could be alone nowhere but in the prison room, and it was there that they parted. Between them, as they stood now at last about to part, there stretched an abysmal gulf which might never personally be passed by either. She faced him at length, trembling, pleading, helpless. "How mighty a thing is a man's sense of honor," she said slowly. "You have done what I never would have asked you to do, and I am glad that you did. I once asked you to do what you would not do, and I am glad that you did not. How can I repay you for what you have done today? I cannot tell how, but I feel that you have turned the tide for us. Ah, if ever you felt that you owed me anything, it is paid, all your debt to me and mine. See, I no longer weep. You have dried my tears." "We cannot balance debits and credits," he replied. "There is no way in the world in which you and I can cry quits. Only one thing is sure, I must go." "I cannot say goodbye," said she. "Ah, do not ask me that. We are but beginning now. Oh, see, see." He looked at her still, an unspeakable sadness in his gaze, at her hand extended pleadingly toward him. "Won't you take my hand, Mern?" said she. "Won't you?" "I dare not," said he hoarsely. "No, I dare not." "Why? Do you wish to leave me still feeling that I am in your debt?" "You can afford so much now," she said brokenly, "for those who have not won." "Think you that I have won?" he broke out. "Theodosia, Theo, I shall call you by your old name just once. I do not take your hand. I dare not touch you because I love you. I always shall. God help me. It is the truth." "Did you get my letters?" she said suddenly, and looked him fair in the face. Meriwether Lewis stood searching her countenance with his own grave eyes. "Letters?" said he at length. "What letters?" Her eyes looked up at him luminously. "You are glorious," said she. "Yes, a woman's name would be safe with you. You're strong. How terrible a thing is a sense of honor, but you're glorious. Goodbye." End of Part 2, Chapter 16.
Part 2, Chapter 17 of The Magnificent Adventure. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by April 6090, California, United States of America. The Magnificent Adventure by Emerson Hough. Part 2, Chapter 17. The Friends. Allied in fortunes as they had been in friendship, Meriwether Lewis and William Clark went on side by side in their new labors in the capital of that great land. which they had won for the Republic. Their offices in title were distinct, yet scarcely so in fact, for each helped the other as they had always done. To these two men the new territory of Louisiana owed not only its discovery, but its early passing over to the day of law and order. No other men could have done what they did in that time of disorder and change, when, rolling to the west in countless waves, came the white men, following the bee, crossing the great river, striking out into the new lands, a headstrong, turbulent, and lawless population. 1,000 new and petty cares came to Governor Lewis. He passed from one duty to another, from one part of his vast province to another, traveling continually with the crude methods of transportation of that period, and busy night and day. Courts must be established. The compilation of the archives must be cared for. Records must be instituted to clear up the swarm of conflicts over land titles. Scores of new duties arose, and scores of new remedies needed to be devised. The first figure of the growing capital of St. Louis, the new governor, was also the central figure of all social activities, the cynosure of all eyes. But the laughing belles of St. Louis at length sighed and gave him up. They loved him as governor, since they might not as man. Wise, firm, deliberate, kind, sad, he was an old man now, though still young in years. Scattered up and down the great valley, above and below St. Louis, and harboring in that town, were many of the late adherents of Burr's broken conspiracy. These liked not the oncoming of the American government, enforced by so rigid an executive as the one who now held power. Threats came to the ears of Meriwether Lewis, who was hated by the Burr adherents as the cause of their discomfiture. But he, wholly devoid of the fear of any man, only laughed at them, honest and blameless. It was difficult for any enemy to injure him, and no man cared to meet Meriwether Lewis in the open. But at last one means of attack was found. Once more, the last time, the great heart of a noble man was pierced. "Will," said he to his friend, as they met at William Clark's home, according to their frequent custom, "I am in trouble." "Fancied trouble, Marnay," said Clark. "You're always finding it. What I might call it fancied. But this is something in the way of facts, and very stubborn facts. See here." He held out certain papers in his hand. "By this morning's mail I get back these bills protested by the government at Washington. And they are bills that I have drawn to pay the expenses of administering my office here." "Tut, tut," said William Clark gravely. "Come, let us see." "Look here and here. Will, you know that I am a man of no great fortune. You also know that I have made certain enemies in this country. But now I am not supported by my own government. I am ruined. I am a broken man. Did you think that this country could do that for either of us? But, Marnay, you, the soul of honor, some enemy has done this. What influences have been set to work, I cannot say. But here are the bills, and there are others out in other hands, also protested, I have no doubt. I am publicly discredited, disgraced. I know not what has been said of me at Washington." "That is the trouble," said William Clark slowly. "Washington is so far. But now, you must not let this trouble you. 'Tis only some $6 a week clerk in Washington that has done it. You must not consider it to be the deliberate act of any responsible head of the government. You take things too hard, Marnay. I will not have you brooding over this. It will never do. You have the megrims often enough, as it is. Come here and kiss the baby. He is named for you Meriwether Lewis, and he has 2 teeth. Sit down and behave yourself. Judy will be here in a minute. You are among your friends. Do not grieve. 'Twill all come well." This was in the year 1809. Mr. Jefferson's embargo on foreign trade had paralyzed all Western commerce. Our ships lay idle, our crops rotted, There was no market. The name of Jefferson was now in general execration. In March, when his second term as president expired, he had retired to private life at Monticello. He had written his last message to Congress that very spring, in which he said of the people of his country, "I trust that in their steady character, unshaken by difficulties, in their love of liberty, obedience to law, and support of the public authorities, I see a sure guarantee of the permanence of our republic, and retiring from the charge of their affairs, I carry with me the consolation of a firm persuasion that heaven has in store for our beloved country long ages to come of prosperity and happiness." Whatever the veering self-interest of others led them to think or do regarding the memory of that great man, Meriwether Lewis trusted Thomas Jefferson absolutely, and relied wholly on his friendship and his counsel. Now, in the hour of trouble, he resolved to journey to Monticello to ask the advice of his old chief, as he had always done. In this he was well supported by his friend Dr. Saugrain. "You are ill, governor. You have the fever of these lands," urged that worthy. "By all means leave this country, and go back to the east. Go by way of New Orleans and the sea. The voyage will do you much good." "Peria," said Meriwether Lewis to his French servant and attendant, "make ready my papers for my journey. Have a small case, such as can be carried on horseback. I must take with me all my journals, my maps, and certain of the records of my office here. Get my old spyglass. I may need it, and I always fancy to have it with me when I travel, as was my custom in the West. Secure for our costs in travel some gold, $300 or $400, I imagine. I will take some in my belt, and give the rest to you for the saddle trunk." "Your Excellency plans to go by land, then, and not by sea?" "I do not know. I must save all the time possible. And Peria—" "Yes, Excellency. Have my pistols well cared for, and your own as well. See that my small powder canister with bullets is with them in the holsters. The trails are none too safe. Be careful whom you advise of our plans. My business is of private nature, and I do not wish to be disturbed. And here, take my watch," he concluded. "It was given to me by a friend, a good friend, Mr. Wirt, and I prize it very much, so much that I fear to have it on my person. Care for it in the saddle trunk." "Yes, Excellency." "Do not call me Excellency. I detest the title. I am Governor Lewis, and may so be distinguished. Go now, and do as I have told you. We shall need about 10 men to man the barge. Arrange it. Have our goods ready for an early start tomorrow morning." All that night, sleepless, fevered, almost distracted, Meriwether Lewis sat at his desk, writing, or endeavoring to write. With what matters upon his soul we may not ask. But the long night wore away at last, and morning came, a morning of the early fall, beautiful as it may be only in that latitude. Without having closed his eyes in sleep, the governor made ready for his journey to the east. Whether or not Peria was faithful to all his instructions, one cannot say, but certainly all St. Louis knew of the intended departure of the governor. They loved him, these folk trusted him, would miss him now, and they gathered almost en masse to bid him Godspeed upon his journey. "These papers for Mr. Jefferson, governor, certain land titles of which we spoke to him last year. Do you not remember?" Thus Chateau, always busy with affairs. "These samples of cloth and of satin, governor," said a dark-eyed French girl, smiling up at him. "Would you match them for me in the East? I am to be married in the spring. The price of furs, learn of that, governor, if you can, while on your journey. The embargo has ruined the trade in all this inland country." It was Manuel Liza, swarthy, taciturn, who thus voiced a general feeling. "Books, more books, my son," implored Dr. Saugrain. "We are growing here. I must keep up with the surgery of the day. I must know the new discoveries in medicine. Bring me books, and take this little case of medicines. You are ill, my son. The fever has you. My people, they mourn for me as dead. said Big White, the Mandan, who had never returned to his people up the Missouri River since the repulse of his convoy by the Sioux. "Tell the Great Father that he must send me soldiers to take me back home to my people. My heart is poor. Governor, see if you can get me an artificial limb of some sort while you are in the East." It was young George Shannon who had said this, leaning on his crutch. Shannon had not long ago returned from another trip up the river, where in an encounter with the Sioux he had received a wound which cost him a leg, and almost cost him his life. Though later, as has already been said, he was to become a noted figure at the bar of the state of Kentucky. Yes, yes, and yes. Their leader, punctilious as he was kind, agreed to all these commissions, prizing them indeed as proof of the confidence of his people. He was ready to depart, but stood still, looking about for the tall figure, which presently he saw advancing through the throng. A tall man with wide mouth and sunny hair, with blue eyes and stalwart frame. William Clark, the friend whom he loved so much, and whom he was now to see for the last time. General Clark carried upon his arm the baby, which had been named after the governor of the new territory. Lewis took him from his father's arms and pressed the child's cool face to his own, suddenly trembling a little about his own lips as he felt the tender flesh of the infant. No child of his own might he ever hold thus. He gave him back with a last look into the face of his friend. "Good-bye, Will," said he. End of chapter 17.
Part 2, Chapter 18 of The Magnificent Adventure. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ritu, Canada. Part 2, Chapter 18 of The Magnificent Adventure by Emerson Hough. The Wilderness. The governor's barge swept down the rolling flood of the Mississippi, impelled by the blades of 10 sturdy oarsmen. Little by little, the blue smoke of St. Louis town faded beyond the level of the forest. The stone tower of the old Spanish stockade, where floated the American flag, disappeared finally. Meriwether Lewis sat staring back, but seeming not to note what passed. He did not even notice a long bateau which left the wharf just before his own and preceded him down the river, now loafing along aimlessly, sometimes ahead, sometimes behind that of the governor and his party. In time he turned to his lap desk and began his endless task of writing, examining, revising. Now and again he muttered to himself. The fever was indeed in his blood. They proceeded thus, after the usual fashion of boat travel in those days, down the great river until they had passed the mouth of the Ohio and reached what was known as the Chickasaw Bluffs, below the confluence of the two streams. Here was a little post of the army, arranged for the commander, Major Neely, Indian agent at that point. As was the custom, all barges tied up here, and the governor's craft moored at the foot of the bluff. Its chief passenger was so weak that he hardly could walk up the steep steps cut in the muddy front of the bank. "Governor Lewis," exclaimed Major Neely, as he met him, "you are ill. You are in an ague." Perhaps. Give me rest here for a day or two, if you please. Then I fancy I shall be strong enough to travel east. See if you can get horses for myself and my party." "I am resolved not to go by sea. I have not time." The governor of Louisiana, haggard, flushed with fever, staggered as he followed his friend into the apartment assigned to him in one of the cabins of the little post. He wore his usual traveling garb, but now, for some strange reason, he seemed to lack his usual immaculate neatness. Instead of the formal dress of his office, he wore an old, stained, faded uniform coat, its pocket bulging with papers. This he kept at the head of his bed when at length he flung himself down, almost in the delirium of fever. He lay here for 2 days, restless, sleepless, but at length, having in the meantime scarcely tasted food, he rose and declared that he must go on. "Major," said he, "I can ride now. Have you horses for the journey? Are you sure, Governor, that your strength is sufficient? Neely hesitated as he looked at the wasted form before him, at the hollow eye, the fevered face. It is not a question of my personal convenience, Major, said Meriwether Lewis. Time presses for me. I must go on. At least you should not go alone, said Major Neely. You should have some escort. Doubtless you have important papers? Meriwether Lewis nodded. My servant has arranged everything, I fancy. Can you get an extra man or two? The Natchez trace is none too safe. That military road, as they both knew, was indeed no more than a horse path cut through the trackless forest which lay across the states of Mississippi, Tennessee, and Kentucky. Its reputation was not good. Many a trader passing north from New Orleans with coin, many a settler passing west with pack horses and household effects, had disappeared on this wilderness road and left no sign. It was customary for parties of any consequence to ride in companies of some force. It was a considerable cavalcade, therefore, which presently set forth from Chickasaw Bluffs on the long ride eastward to cross the Alleghanies, which meant some days or weeks spent in the saddle. Apprehension sat upon all, even as they started out. Their eyes rested upon the wasted form of their leader, the delirium of whose fevers seemed still to hold him. He muttered to himself as he rode, resented the near approach of any travelling companion, demanded to be alone. They looked at him in silence. He talks to himself all the time, said one of the party, a new man, hired by Neely at the army post. He rode with Perea now, and none but Perea knew that he had come from the long barge which had clung to the governor's craft all the way down the river, and which, unknown to Lewis himself, had tied up and waited at Chickasaw Bluffs. He was a stranger to Neely and to all the others, but seemed ready enough to take pay for service along the trace, declaring that he himself was intending to go that way. He was a man well dressed, apparently of education and of some means. He rode armed. What is wrong with the governor, think you? Inquired this man once more of Perea, Lewis's servant. It is his way, shrugged Perea. We leave him alone. His hand is heavy when he is angry. He rides always with his rifle across his saddle, always on the trail. Loaded, I presume, and his pistols? You may well suppose that, said Perea. Oh well, said the new member of the party. 'Tis just as well to be safe. I lifted his saddlebags and the desk, or trunk, whatever you call it, that is on the pack horse yonder. Heavy, eh? Naturally, grinned Perea. They looked at one another, and thereafter the two, as was well noted, conversed often and more intimately together as the journey progressed. Now it's an odd thing about his coat, volunteered the stranger later in that same day. He always keeps it on, that ragged old uniform. Was it a uniform, do you believe? Can't the governor of the new territory wear a coat that shows his own quality? This one is a dozen years old, you might say. He always wears it on the trail, said Perea. At home he watches it as if it held some treasure. Treasure? The shifty eyes of the new man flashed in sudden interest. What treasure? Papers, perhaps, bills, documents, money? His pocket bulges at the side. Something there, yes, eh? Hush, said Perea. You do not know that man, the governor. He has the eye of a hawk, the ear of a fox. You can keep nothing from him. He fears nothing in the world. And in his moods, you'd best leave him alone. Don't let him suspect or... And Perea shook his head. The cavalcade was well out into the wilderness east of the Mississippi on that afternoon of October 8 in the year 1809. Stopping at the wayside taverns, which now and then were found, they had progressed perhaps 100 miles to the eastward. The day was drawing toward its close when Perea rode up and announced that one or two of the horses had strayed from the trail. I have told you to be more careful, Perea, expostulated Governor Lewis. There are articles on the pack horse, which I need at night. Who is this new man that is so careless? Why do you not keep the horses up? Go, then, and get them. Major Neely, would you be so kind as to join the men and assure them of bringing on the horses? And what of you, Governor? I shall go on ahead, if you please. Is there no house nearby? You know the trail. Perhaps we can get lodgings not far on. The first white man's house beyond here, answered Neely, belongs to an old man named Grinder. 'Tis no more than a few miles ahead. Suppose we join you there? Agreed. said Lewis, and setting spurs to his horse, he left them. It was late in the evening when at length Meriwether Lewis reined up in front of the somewhat unattractive Grinder homestead cabin, squatted down alongside the Natchez Trace, a place where sometimes hospitality of a sort was dispensed. It was an ordinary double cabin that he saw, 2 cob-house apartments with a covered space between such as might have been found anywhere for hundreds of miles on either side of the Alleghanies at that time. At his call there appeared a woman. Mrs. Grinder, she announced herself. "Madam," he inquired, "could you entertain me and my party for the night? I am alone at present, but my servants will soon be up. They are on the trail in search of some horses which have strayed." "My husband is not here," said the woman. "We are not well fixed, but I reckon if we can stand it all the time, you can for a night. How many are there in your party?" "A half dozen, with an extra horse or 2. "I reckon we can fix ye up. Lie down and come in." She was noting well her guest, and her shrewd eyes determined him to be no common man. He had the bearing of a gentleman, the carriage of a man used to command. Certain of his garments seemed to show wealth, although she noted, when he stripped off his travelling smock, that he wore not a new coat, but an old one, very old. She would have said soiled, stained, faded. It looked as if it had once been part of a uniform. Her guest, whoever he was, and she neither knew nor asked, for the Wilderness Tavern held no register, and few questions were asked or answered, paid small attention to the woman. He carried his saddlebags into the room pointed out to him, flung them down, and began to pace up and down, sometimes talking to himself. The woman eyed him from time to time as she went about her duties. "Set up and eat," she said at last. "I reckon your men are not coming." "I thank you, madam," said the stranger, with gentle courtesy. "Do not let me trouble you too much. I have been ill of late, and do not as yet experience much hunger." Indeed, he scarcely tasted the food. He sat, as she noted, a long time, gazing fixedly out of the door over the forest toward the west. "Is it not a beautiful world, madam?" said he after a time, in a voice of great gentleness and charm. "I have seen the forest often thus in the west in the evening, when the day was done. It is wonderful. Yes, some of my folks is thinking of going out further into the west." He turned to her abstractedly, yet endeavouring to be courteous. "A wonderful country, madam," said he, and so he fell again into his moody staring out beyond the door. After a time the hostess of the backwoods cabin sought to make up a bed for him, but he motioned to her to desist. "It is not necessary," said he. "I have slept so much in the open that 'tis rarely I use a bed at all. I see now that my servant has come up and is in the yard yonder. Tell him to bring my robes and blankets and spread them here on the floor as I always have them. That will answer quite well enough. Thank you." Peria, it seemed, had by this time found his way to the cabin along the trail. He was alone. "Come, man," said Lewis, "make down my bed for me. I am ill. And tell me, where is my powder? Where are the bullets for my pistols? I find them empty. Haven't I told you to be more careful about these things? And where is my rifle powder? The canister is here, but 'tis empty. Come, come, I must have better service than this." But even as he chided the remissness of his servant, he seemed to forget the matter in his mind. Presently he was again pacing apart, stopping now and then to stare out over the forest. "I must have a place to write," said he at length. "I shall be awake for a time tonight, occupied with business matters of importance. Where is Major Neely? Where are the other men? Why have they not come up?" Peria could not or did not answer these questions, but sullenly went about the business of making his master as comfortable as he might, and then departed to his own quarters down the hill in another building. The old backwoods woman herself withdrew to the other apartment, beyond the open space of the double cabin. The soft velvet darkness of night in the forest now came on apace, a night of silence. There was not even the call of a treed toad. The voice of the whippoorwill was stilled at that season of the year. If there were human beings awake, alert at that time, they made no sound. Meriwether Lewis was alone, alone in the wilderness again. Its silences, its mysteries drew about him. But now he stood, not enjoying in his usual fashion the familiar feeling of the night in the forest, the calm, the repose it customarily brought to him. He stood looking intently, as if he expected someone, nay, indeed, as if he saw someone, as if he saw a face. What face was it? At last he made his way across the room to the heavy saddle case which had been placed there. He flung the lid open and felt among the contents. It seemed to him there was not so much within the case as there should have been. He missed certain papers, and resolved to ask Peria about them. He could not find the little bags of coin which he expected, but he found the watch lying covered in a corner of the case. He drew it out, and stepping toward the flickering candle, opened it, gazing fixedly at the little silhouette cut round to fit in the back of the case. It was a face that he had seen before. 100 times he had gazed thus at it on the far western trails. He brought the little portrait close up to his eyes, but not close to his lips. No, he did not kiss the face of the woman who once had written to him, "You must not kiss my picture, because I am in your power." Meriwether Lewis had won his long fight. He had mastered the human emotions of his soul at last. The battle had been such that he sat here now, weak and spent. He sat looking at the face which had meant so much to him all these years. There came into his mind some recollection of words that she had written to him once, something about the sound of water. He lifted his head and listened. Yes, there was a sound coming faintly through the night, the trickle of a little brook in the ravine below the window. Always, he recalled, she had spoken of the sound of water, saying that music would blot out memory, saying that water would wash out secrets, would wash out sins. What was it she had said? What was it she had written to him long ago? What did it mean about the water? The sound of the little brook came to his ears again in some shift of the wind. He rose and stumbled toward the window, carrying the candle in his hand. His haggard face was lighted by its flare as he stood there, leaning out, listening. It was then that his doom came to him. There came the sound of a shot, a second, and yet another. The woman in the cabin nearby heard them clearly enough. She rose and listened. There was no sound from the other cabins. The servants paid no attention to the shots, if they had heard them. And why should they not have heard them? No one called out. No one came running. Frightened, the woman rose, and after a time stepped timidly across the covered space between the two rooms, toward the light which she saw shining faintly through the cracks of the door. She heard groans within. A tall and ghastly figure met her as she approached the door. She saw his face, white and haggard and stained. From a wound in the forehead, a broad band of something dark fell across his cheek. From his throat something dark was welling. He clutched a hand on his breast, and his fingers were dark. He was bleeding from 3 wounds, but still he stood and spoke to her. "In God's name, madam," said he, "bring me water. I am killed." She ran away, she knew not where, calling to the others to come, but they did not come. She was alone. Once more, forgetful of her errand, incapable of rendering aid, she went back to the door. She heard no sound. She flung open the door and peered into the room. The candle was standing, broken and guttering, on the floor. She could see the scattered belongings of the travelling cases, empty now. The occupant of the room was gone. In terror she fled once more, back to her own room, and cowered in her bed. Staggering, groping, his hands strained to him to hold in the life that was passing. Meriwether Lewis had left the room where he had received his wounds, and had stepped out into the air, into the night. All the resolution of his soul was bent upon one purpose. He staggered, but still stumbled onward. It seemed to him that he heard the sound of water, and blindly, unconsciously, he headed that way. He entered the shadow of the woods and passed down the little slope of the hill. He fell rather than seated himself at the side of the brook whose voice he had heard in the night. He was alone. The wilderness was all about him, the wilderness which had always called to him, and which now was to claim him. He sat, gasping, almost blind, feeling at his pockets. At last he found it, one of the sulphur matches made for him by good old Dr. Saugrain. Tremblingly he essayed to light it, and at last he saw the flare. With skill of custom, though now almost unconsciously, his fingers felt for dry bits of bark and leaves, little twigs. Yes, the match served its purpose. A tiny flame flickered between his feet as he sat. Did any eye see Meriwether Lewis as he sat there in the dark at his last campfire? Did any guilty eye look on him making his last fight? He sat alone by the little fire, his hand dropping sometimes, responsive only to the supreme effort of his will, fumbled in the bosom of his old coat. There were some papers there, some things which no other eyes than his must ever see. Here was a secret. It must always be a secret. Her secret and his. He would hide forever from the world what had been theirs in common. The tiny flame rose up more strongly, twice, thrice, 5 times, 6 times in all. One by one he had placed them on the flames. These letters that he had carried on his heart for years, the 6 letters that she had written him when he was far away in the unknown. He held the last one long, trying to see the words. He groaned. He was almost blind. His trembling finger found the last word of the last letter. It rose before him in tall characters now, all done in flame and not in block. Theodosia. Now they were gone. No one could ever see them. No one could know how he had treasured them all these years. She was safe. Before his soul, in the time of his great accounting, there rose the passing picture of the years, free from suffering. Now absolved, resigned, he was a boy once more, and all the world was young. He saw again the slopes of old Albemarle, beautiful in the green and gold of an early autumn day in old Virginia. He heard again his mother's voice. What was it that she said? He bent his head as if to listen. Your wish, your great desire, your hope, your dream, all these shall be yours at last, even though the trail be long, even though the burden be too heavy to carry farther. So then she had known. She had spoken the truth in her soothsaying that day so long ago. Now his fading eye looked about him, and he nodded his head weakly, as if to assent to something he had heard. He had so earnestly longed, he had so greatly desired to be an honourable man. He had so longed and desired to do somewhat for others than himself. And here was peace. Here indeed was conquest. His great desire was won. His lax hands dropped between his knees as he sat. A little gust of wind sweeping down the gully caught up some of the white ashes, stained as they were with blood, that dropped from his veins as he bent above them, carried them down upon the tiny thread of the little brook. It carried them away toward the sea, his blood, the ashes, the secret which they hid. At length he rose once more, his splendid will still forcing his broken body to do its bidding. Half crawling up the bank, once more he stood erect and staggered back across the yard into the room. The woman heard him there again. Pity arose in her breast. Once more she mastered her terror and approached the door. In God's name, madam, said he, bring me water, wine. I am so strong. I am hard to die. Bind up my wounds. I have work to do. Heal me these wounds. But not her power nor any power could heal such wounds as his. Once more she called out for aid, and none came. The night wore away. The dying man lay on his bearskin pallet on the floor, motionless now and silent, but still breathing, and calm at last. It was dawn when the recreant servant found him there. Peria, said Meriwether Lewis, turning his fading eye on the man, do not fear me. I will not hurt you. But my watch, I cannot find it. It seems gone. I am hard to die, it seems. But the little watch, it had a picture. Ah! End of Part 2, Chapter 18.
Part 2, Chapter 19 of The Magnificent Adventure. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by April 6090, California, United States of America. The Magnificent Adventure by Emerson Hough. Down to the sea. Many days later, the French servant, Peria, rode up to the gate. to the door of Locust Hall, the Lewis homestead in Old Virginia. The news he bore had preceded him. He met a stern-faced, dark-browed woman who regarded him coldly when he announced his name, regarded him in silence. The servant found himself able to make but small speech. "Your son was a brave man. He lived long," said Perea, haltingly, at the close of his story. "Yes," said the mother of Meriwether Lewis, "he was a brave man. He was strong." "He was unhappy, but why should he have killed himself?" "Stop!" The dark eyes blazed upon him. "What are you saying? My son kill himself? It is an outrage to his memory to suggest it. He was the victim of some enemy. As for you, be gone!" So Perea passed from sight and view, and almost from memory. Not accused, not acquitted. Long afterward, a brother of Meriwether Lewis met him, and found that he was carrying the old rifle and the little watch which every member of the family knew so well. These things had been missing from the effects of Meriwether Lewis in the inventory. Indeed, little remained in the traveling cases, save a few scattered papers and the old spyglass. There was no gold. There were no letters of any kind. Soon there came down from Monticello to Locust Hall the coach of Thomas Jefferson. "Madam," said he, when finally he stood at the side of the mistress of Locust Hall, "it is heavy news I thought to bring. I see that you have heard it. What shall I say? What can we say to each other? I mourn him as if he were my own son." "It has come at last," said the mother of Meriwether Lewis. "The wilderness has him, as I knew it would. I told him, here at this place, when he was a boy, that at last the load would weigh him down." "The rumor is that he died by his own hand. I find it difficult to believe. It is far more likely that some enemy or robber was guilty of the deed." "Whom had he ever harmed?" she demanded of Jefferson. "None in the world with intent, but he had enemies, whether by his own hand or that of another. He died a gallant gentleman. He would not think of himself alone. But listen, bear with me if I tell you that could your son send out the news himself, perhaps he might say, "'Twas by his own hand he perished, and not by that of another." Never, Mr. Jefferson, never will I believe that. It was not in his nature. "I agree with you. But when we take the last wishes of the dead, we take what is the law for us. And the law of your son was the law of honor. Suppose, my dear madam, there were a woman concerned in this matter." "He never wronged a woman in his life." "Precisely, nor in his death would he wrong one. Do you begin to see?" "Did he ever speak to you of her?" "It was impossible that he should, but I knew them both. I knew their secret. Were it in his power to do so, I am sure that he carried his secret with him, so that it might never be shared by any. That secret he has guarded in death as in life." "But shall I let that stain rest on his name?" The dark eye of the old woman gleamed upon her son's friend. "Do not I love him also? I am speaking now only of his own wish, not ours. I know that he would shield her at any cost. Nay, I know he did shield her at any cost. May not we shield him and her, no matter what the cost to us? If he laid that wish on us, ought we not to respect it? Madam, I shall frame a letter which will serve to appease the criticism of the public in regard to your son. If it be not the exact truth, and who shall tell the exact truth? It will at least be accepted as truth, and it will forever silence any talk. What should the public know of a life such as his? There are some lives which are tragically large, and such was his. He lived with honor, and he could not die without it. What was in his heart we shall not ask to know. If ever he sinned, he is purged of any sin." Jefferson was silent for a moment, holding the bereaved mother's hand in his own. "He shall have a monument, madam," he went on. "It shall mark his grave in yonder wilderness. They shall name at least a county for him, and hold it his sacred grave place, there in Tennessee, by the old Indian road. Let him lie there under the trees. That is as he would wish. He shall have some monument, yes, but how futile is all that! His greatest monument will be in the vast new country which he has now brought to us. He was a man of a natural greatness not surpassed by any of his time. What of Theodosia Alston? Loyal and lofty soul, blameless wife, devoted and pathetic adherent to the fallen fortunes of her ill-starred father? 3 years after, Meriwether Lewis laid him down to sleep in the forest. A ship put out from Charleston Wharf. It was bound for the city of New York, where at that time there was living a broken, homeless, forsaken man named Aaron Burr, a man execrated at home, discredited abroad, but who now, after years of exile, had crept home to the country which had cast him out. A passenger on that ship was Theodosia Alston, the daughter of Aaron Burr. That much is known. The ship sailed, it never came to port, no more is known. To this day, none knows what was the fate of Aaron Burr's daughter, one of the most appealing figures of her day, a woman made for happiness, but continually in close touch with tragedy. Wherever her body may lie, she has her wish. The sound of the eternal waters is the continuous requiem in her ears. Her secret, if she had one, is washed away long ere this, and is one with the eternal secrets of the sea. As to her sin, she had none. Above her memory, since she has no grave, there might best be inscribed the words she wrote at a time of her own despair. I hope to be happy in the next world, for I have not been bad in this. Did the little brook in Tennessee ever find its way down to the sea? Did it carry a scattered drop of a man's lifeblood, little by little thinning on its long journey? Did ever a wandering flake of ashes, melting, rest on its bosom for so great a journey as that toward the sea? Did the sound of a voice in the wilderness passing across the unknown leagues ever reach an ear that heard? Who can tell? Perhaps in the great 10,000 years such things may be. Perhaps deep calls to deep, and there are no longer sins nor tears. A million hearth fires mark the campfire trail of Meriwether Lewis. We own the country which he found, and for which he paid. He sleeps. Above him stands the monument which his chief assigned to him, his country. It rises now in glory and splendor, the perfected vision which he saw. That is the happy ending of his story, his country. It is ours, as its title came to us in honor. It is for us to love it honorably, to use it honorably, and to defend it honorably. None may withstand us while we hold to his ambitions, while our sons measure to the stature of such a man. End of Part 2, Chapter 19. End of The Magnificent Adventure by Emerson Hough.